morning. Thank you for all for waiting. I'm actually going to start a little teeny weeny bit early, so if this was in Japan or Korea or somewhere, we'd be in big trouble because I think I apologise for starting a train 20 seconds early somewhere the other day. But I'm going to start early because the first bit, me, isn't very important, and then it will be 9:30, and if anybody arrives late, I'll get all the important stuff anyway. My name is Lewis Blackwell. I'm the Director of Strategy and Development here at the Building Centre. It's our great pleasure to put on this event, and I'd really like to hear from you if you, after the event, give us any feedback you want on other things you want along these lines, more sort of technical briefings, because we should do more of it. And of course, as you know, our partner for this event is the B1M, who know a lot about this kind of thing, and I'd love to do more things with them. But you'll hear a lot more from Fred shortly. A little bit of housekeeping. The fire exit, where you came in, that's one of them, and then the ones out to the right. Hopefully we have no need for that. We are videoing the event, so I hope that's okay with you. The good thing about that is that we will upload it probably early-ish next week, we aimed for, so if there was something that happened today that you thought, what was it that he said, you can go and look at the video and you can see it all again. So that would be good. Now, the format of the day and everything else can be explained to you by Fred in a second, so I think it just falls to me to really introduce him well. I will come back later on to manage the panel discussion. So just a little bit of build-up for Fred. Fred Mills is co-founder of the B1M, the world's leading video channel for construction. I'm sure you're all fans. I am. He's worked with two of the UK's leading main contractors, and with that background, he went on to establish the B1M, which aims to really educate and upskill the construction industry, what we're doing today, I suppose. And the BIM for Beginners series has gone on to be used by over 500 organisations and project teams around the world. Data on the BIM, 144 countries and 350,000 people a month are watching his amazing videos. So we're going to find out what it's all about. So where are you, Fred? There you are. Please, come and join us.
Morning, everyone. How are you doing? Good.
Can you all hear me okay? That's always a good start. Excellent. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. We really, really appreciate you spending the money and the time to come along. This is a two-way conversation. It's not us lecturing to you for hours on end. Please get involved. There's a hashtag BIM for Beginners, which is predominantly on Twitter, but other social media as well. There's also free Wi-Fi, the Building Centre Wi-Fi. If you put your email address in, you can actually get on the internet to use that hashtag. Wonders of technology. Lewis done a bit of housekeeping already. He mentioned the fire exits, but equally, if you're overwhelmed with what we're talking about, rush for the door and escape if you want to. Whilst I've just mentioned about social media and hashtags, we encourage that, but if you could do it with your phones on the vibrate silent mode, that would be good. And we will give you more coffee a little bit later on as we go through, probably about 11 o'clock, if that is okay. We're all adults. If you're gagging for a coffee, as I was first thing, then please just go and grab one. It's not a problem at all. We have got the A-team for you this morning. Well, the A-team and me. Myself, I'm Fred Mills, co-founder of the B1M, which Lewis explained is the definitive video channel for construction. I'm going to actually explain a bit more about what I do after I've spoken to you for a bit this morning, because it will then make, hopefully, a lot more sense about why I'm doing it and where my motives lie. John Eynon, who is engagement lead of the UK BIM Alliance and all-round legend of the construction industry and building information modelling, one of our country's main champions and advocates of BIM. So it's a real privilege to be sharing this platform with John this morning. And David Miller, who is principal of the award-winning David Miller Architects, who's done some phenomenal work on building information modelling. He's going to talk to you a little bit later on about how we put some of the theory that we're going to talk about this morning into practice in a real-life situation to deliver real results for a company and for an organisation. So, agenda, what we're going to run through. Welcome and context and the why. Why are we here? Why are you here? Why are we doing this? Because I think getting that set from the outset is really important. Once you understand that, the rest of it should hopefully drop into place. You can quote me on that later on, hopefully. Then we're going to go into introduction to level 2. So what are we talking about? What do we mean? And that's really where John Eynon's going to come up and give the great presentation that he does on what we're talking about with all this building information modelling stuff. We're then going to have a break around 11 o'clock, as I said. back in here then for a bit more about the forward-thinking side of Level 2. A bit of context for you on BIM Level 3 and Digital Built Britain. That is a long way ahead of where we are at the moment. The reason we're giving you that is to give you a picture of where this is headed, because again, understanding where it's headed will help you understand what we mean by Level 2 and that bit in the middle. Then we're going to have BIM in practice from David, and then you have a chance to grill us and question us to your heart's content. We are yours this morning, you own us effectively, so you can ask us any sort of question here, afterwards, on Twitter. We're going to give you our email addresses as well, so you can bombard us that way. We are here to serve you and to help you guys get this right. So, let's start with a bit about building information modelling. Quick show of hands, who would class themselves as a BIM beginner? Unanimous, goodness me. Excellent, landslide. So am I right in saying that if I was to ask someone, I won't by the way, but if I was to ask someone to come up to the front and give a clear definition about what BIM is, who'd feel comfortable doing that? It's good that neither of our speakers have put their hand up either. I was hoping maybe John might put his hand up. No, great. It's going to be a good morning. Good, that's just good to get a handle on where we are. So this morning we're going to take you through BIM for beginners, which is the topic of the event, obviously. There is a tendency for experts like myself, I just call myself an expert, it's very big-headed, isn't it? Experts like myself and some of our speakers to talk in acronyms and big terminology. That is not allowed this morning. So what I need you to do as our audience is to be our acronym alarm. So if we talk and we give an acronym or a three-letter acronym, even ASAP or FYI, just tell us, stop us, say, hang on Fred, I've paid to be here, what the hell do you mean? And we will explain, within reason. So I want to start with a bit about the world we live in, and I want everyone in their minds to park and forget BIM, Building Information Modelling, for the moment. This is the world we live in, planet Earth, hopefully you're aware of that. The world is changing. There is a digital evolution coming over our planet, and you'll see that in every walk of your life, from the smartphone you have, from the way you consume television on streamed services, from walking down the street, from catching public transport, from the way you communicate with your families, from what you do in your working life. It's kind of happening all around us. We're also experiencing a heavy degree of globalization as well. So the historic borders between our nations and trade barriers and everything are all sort of blurring into one. Throw into that Trump and Brexit and God knows what else, and we've got the planet that we all happily live on. That's entering the construction industry in a number of ways. So I've just put up a few images here of some of the ways that technology is starting to come into our sector. These are videos we produced, which I can show a bit later on. Smog-eating buildings, virtual reality and augmented reality, robots building walls, 4D printed materials that can change shape over time. Phenomenal innovation that's starting to come into and disrupt our sector from where it used to be. In the wider world, we've got Google working on driverless cars. We've got Elon Musk looking at the Hyperloop program, which is high-speed rail transportation, which is going to be faster than airline travel, taking you between places like Dubai and Abu Dhabi. There's a 2-hour drive in 12 minutes. Just absolutely earth-shattering kind of changes. Nest, so like big data, smart technologies in the home, and even 3D printed steel bridges on site. Crazy, crazy stuff. A bit closer to home, we've got pervasive new business models coming into the world we live in. We've got, Apple, the biggest company in the world, by 50%. The sharing economy like Airbnb, the exponential growth of Amazon, and new business models like Uber as well. I recognise that as I got up this morning and looked at the news, Uber in more trouble. So I'm by no means endorsing them here this morning, but they're on that slide. In contrast to that new digital, fast evolving world is the construction industry, the dear old construction industry. Now I'm passionate about construction. We have some phenomenal people, we do some phenomenal things, but we could be a lot better. We still work in silos. We transfer risk down the supply chain. We err a bit more towards litigation than to collaboration. I'm not talking about the people in this room, by the way. I'm talking about our collective industry as a whole. Because I think by turning up here today, you are inherently forward-thinking, which is good. We still work in silos. We transfer risk. We employ the wrong form of contracts, the wrong kind of procurement processes, and we hand over projects with defects lists on every job we do as standards. We're focused more on what we're doing rather than the outcomes and outputs for our end user, the built asset we're delivering. So the way we behave is starting to be shown up quite a bit by this digital evolution, by this new world that we all live in. And that technological, advanced, progressive world don't really understand construction. They look at construction, the male-dominated sector I've just described, that transfers risk, gets involved in litigation, doesn't deliver the best built environment, and they don't understand it. And as the world moves on and construction stays as it is, we're starting to look worse and worse as a sector. It boils down to three key areas where we believe we could be better. That's efficiency, collaboration, and productivity. On all three of those, we are behind the curve. We've probably done the most work on collaboration. We could be significantly more efficient. We could be significantly more productive. We're starting to be shown up by some of the other industries, the Chinese construction industry in particular, and some of the development in the Middle East. You're starting to show up different regions, but construction as a whole globally, we are behind the curve on these areas. That's a problem because construction matters. In the UK alone, we employ 10% of the population, which is about 2.9 million people, and we contribute £90 billion to the economy every single year. We also touch and influence the lives of every single person and pretty much every single business in this country. So the services and the buildings that we deliver enable pretty much every other industry to operate and perform. So if we get what we do wrong, that affects a lot of people in a lot of ways. If we get it right, it can benefit a lot of people in a lot of ways. Globally, the picture is even bigger. There are 750 million people roughly in the global construction industry, which is a significant chunk of our 7 billion worldwide population. And we have a £12 trillion total output, eye-watering figures that you can't really get your head around. But we matter as an industry. What we do matters to the world we live in and is significantly important. The fact that it matters, the fact that what we do matters, and those problems that I mentioned earlier, is a problem because we're not being as effective to the world we live in as we could be. We're not being as influential to the society and the nations and the world that we're all sharing as we could be. So the UK government back in 2011 recognised this, and they said, look, we've got this exciting new world, we've got a construction industry that could do better and could perform better. How are we going to change that? What are we going to do about it? So they looked at a process called building information modelling, which is a way of working, an environment of working in the construction industry. We're going to explain to you a bit more about what building information modelling actually is and how you do it a little bit later on today. The basics are that when you try and implement building information modelling, you're forced to reconsider a number of different ways about the way you work. So when you try and implement BIM, you're forced to reconsider your procurement approach, your client's brief, why you're building the building you're trying to build in the first place, how you assemble a team, how you collaborate, how you share information, how you transfer risk between yourselves. All of that suddenly becomes up for grabs just by trying to implement building information modelling, which is why it is a challenge to implement it and why it is difficult to implement it. The UK government knew that, and they saw BIM to an extent as a kind of silver bullet that would go through and address a number of these issues. So by encouraging people to adopt BIM, they would address a number of that efficiency, productivity, collaboration issues that I mentioned earlier on. So in the 2011 construction strategy, they stated that all centrally procured government projects would be delivered in a BIM Level 2 environment. We will explain Level 2 to you later on, by 2016, by April 2016, which was fantastic. We had a government of a developed Western country standing up and saying, construction, you will do BIM by this date. We have been led from the front. We had a mandate with very exciting. Lots of people stood up and got behind that mandate. But a period of darkness then kind of ensued to some extent, because it became about BIM and not about that vision that I described at the beginning. It became about the acronym, and people spoke in the acronym, and people associated it with change, working in a different way that I don't really understand, spending more money, drawing in 3D, which takes me more time, all of that stuff. And it became the acronym became its own worst enemy. It became a badge for, as I said, change, spending more money, doing something different that I don't understand. That's a problem. That's probably why many of you are sat here this morning. It's probably why some of us have done so many of these talks to people to try and get the message out. So although we had a mandate, the excitement of BIM really did cloud the water a bit for many people, and we're still unpicking to some extent the damage of that now. The industry has moved towards BIM Level 2 by 2016, which is good. That was centrally procured government departments were doing it by 2016. But the idea that was going to permeate down through the supply chain and become pervasive and business as usual is still a long way to go. And John will talk to you later on about the UK BIM Alliance and what the UK BIM Alliance are now trying to do to get BIM as business as usual by the year 2020. We seem to always pick years that are 4 years ahead, mostly falling on the Olympics as well. I don't know why that is, but that's why we do it. So, people feeling confused, people questioning why they should do this, people having a go at it and having a bad experience, therefore becoming skeptics and being, a step behind zero, was happening across the industry. That's a problem when there are 750 million people in the industry worldwide. This is, I've used this slide many times before, but this is Copacabana Beach in Brazil, where the Pope came to give an address, and 2 million people turned up to see his address, one of the largest gatherings of humankind ever. Copacabana Beach curves, so what you can see in this picture is roughly 1 million people. 750 of those pictures is how many people we have working in the construction industry worldwide. We need all of those people to be working in a better, more collaborative, more efficient way if we're going to move the dial and change the society that we all live and work in, that we share with our families, that we share with our children. Confusion and disparity and pessimism amongst that big group of people is a challenge and is an issue, which is why we're doing this event this morning, is to help understand and unpick and explain what building information modelling actually is. So you get a feel for there, hopefully, the vision at the beginning, the best intentions, what sort of went wrong and how it's become a bit confusing, and the scale of the problem we now have to get this working. The big thing for me is about personalising the value proposition. It's something I'm really, really passionate about. And it's not criticism of the UK government, but inherently when you're talking about a new concept on a national and international scale, it becomes presented in generic terms. Not necessarily generic terms, but you're talking about a concept as a whole, as an overall. So they were talking about documents like PAS 1192. I've used an acronym, we'll explain it later on. And other processes like that, and how to work in a BIM environment. But it felt very techy, it felt very complicated, and it felt a long way from that vision that I described at the beginning, and it felt a long way from being personal to many organisations and businesses. So a lot of people were asking, well, what does this mean to me? How do I do BIM? Why should I do BIM? I've got a full plate, I've got a lot of work, I've got my head down. It's easier to do what I'm doing rather than changing, taking the risk, spending the money, getting it wrong, causing issues and getting confused. So personalising the value proposition is a really, really key thing for me. It's the thing I'm probably most passionate about. I'm going to give you one example. In the government construction strategy in 2011, when they said about putting BIM in, they said studies have shown that if we use building information modelling and we work in the PAS 1192 process, you will see that process later on, we can be 20% more efficient than we are now. So the construction industry could be 20% more efficient. And that's wonderful. That's a big macroeconomic term. It's government, it's white paper, 20% more efficient for this industry. And again, people are like, well, okay, great. I don't really know where I fit in that. I don't know how it works. Bring it back to your businesses, to to your daily life, to what you're doing in and out right now that you're taking your morning out from, that you've probably got emails coming in on your phone about. 20% in a 5-day week is an entire day. Now, you can use that day to take Fridays off, which was tempting. Or you can use that to do more work with your existing workforce, with your existing cost base. So I'm deliberately bringing this back to money here because I kind of know how the world works. And talking about it in financial and commercial terms. If you've got an extra day in your week with the same setup, the same number of staff, the same number of people, you can do more projects. What that means is you're increasing your turnover whilst keeping your cost base the same. You could even maybe reduce your cost base a bit by being slightly more efficient in the way you're working, how you're doing things. That will give you a larger profit margin, which is a powerful, powerful incentive. Now, David's going to talk to you later on about some of the work that he's been doing in his practice, and he will use the phrase, we've been doing more for the same, and in some cases, more for less. He has grown his practice through building information modelling by being more efficient. So what I want to get across this morning, certainly from my part about setting this, is you're going to hear a lot of technical stuff. There's documents, it's boring, it's 3D modelling, it's a bit techie, it's a bit geeky. But actually there's a big vision here that matters to our families, to our kids, to the society we're living in. And you can make more money. Who wouldn't want to do this? It's not obviously as simple as this, and we're going to give you some tips about what it is and how to implement it in your organisation as we go through. What do I actually do then? Question. B1M. Back to the beach. 750 million people worldwide is a lot of people. It's a lot of people to be confused. It's a lot of people to try and explain this concept to. I remember when I was a design manager working for a main contractor, as Lewis said, and I remember feeling a bit disillusioned about the process I was working in, about the day-to-day battle I was facing to try and get my project I was working on designed, delivered, over the line. And I started to try and find out about building information modelling. It seemed like a better way of working. It seemed a way of really changing and improving the working cultures that we have. And for me to find out about BIM, I had to go to events in the evening after work, some of which I had to pay for. I had to download boring PDFs and read them in my spare time. I had to have 20, 30 different conversations with people that were all slightly different and all slightly conflicting. And over the period of about 6 months, I pieced together my own personal interpretation of what building information modelling is, because I was interested enough to do that, and I was kind of a bit tenacious about getting to the bottom of what it actually was. We're asking 750 million people worldwide to do that, to be that proactive, to go through and develop their own interpretations of what it is, which isn't a good idea. So what I did with the B1M was set up, at the time, the definitive video channel for BIM, and the acronym is the BIM 1 million. So taking BIM out from events like this, and from small groups of experts, to the masses, to 1 million people. That was our objective at the time. We did that by putting up useful explanatory videos about BIM on YouTube. So people were getting the same explanation time and time again, and it was being shared virally through the power of the internet and through YouTube Medium. The reason for using video, just a bit of background, online video is going to be 80% of all internet traffic by 2019, which is absolutely phenomenal growth. YouTube itself represents something like 40% of the bandwidth of the entire internet comes through one website, youtube.com. So it's huge. To watch everything uploaded to YouTube today, just today, would take you 65 years of continuous viewing, no sleep, no eating, no breaks. That's just today, that's just on YouTube. Forget Facebook video or Twitter video or anything else. So it's a huge, huge medium. We've since diversified from there. The success of our BIM videos, as Lewis was talking about earlier, really grew us a big audience, and we've diversified into the broader construction industry, which is what I'm really, really passionate about. So we've got construction documentaries, we've got interviews with some of the most influential and famous people in our sector. We've got case studies, 360 videos, fly-throughs, countdowns. It's really, really good fun. And we've grown a bit. In fact, we've even grown quite significantly since I gave my biography for this event earlier in the summer. And I'm very proud to announce that we now have 1 million people every single month watching our videos, which is phenomenal. It puts a lot of pressure on when you're staring down the lens of the camera, but it's phenomenal to have that reach. So going from that sort of 2011, 2012 era, when I decided to set this up on my spare time and was trying to convince people about building information modelling, through a period where people said, oh, that's a silly idea, go back and get a real job, to today where we are now commanding the attention of 1 million people a month and having significant influence across the industry is phenomenal. It's why I've got slightly bits of grey hair down the side of my head, and why my wife has reached new levels of patience, but that's where we are. I'm also very proud that earlier last month we were named by YouTube as their creator on the rise. So YouTube choose one channel every day to feature as their creator on the rise, and I was incredibly proud that they selected and featured B1M back in October 2017, which was phenomenal to be chosen. We didn't quite believe it at first, but it was real. So that's good. So I'm going to hand over to John shortly to take you through a bit more detail about what BIM Level 2 is. But really I want the takeaways from this morning to be the fact that everything you're about to hear, as technical and confusing as it may be, is rooted in a vision that matters to all of us in some way, whether we like it or not. It's going to happen anyway because we're in this wave of digitalisation that's coming over our planet, let alone our industry. And there is a real opportunity here to improve and benefit what you do. So don't worry about the generic terms or the big picture stuff. This can make your business better. It's not about necessarily doing all of it. It's asking, how do we work at the minute and how can we use digital technology and some of the building information modelling principles to be better at what we do, to improve what we do for our clients, to improve what we do for ourselves. In terms of Q&A, we're going to keep that to the end if that's okay, so you have a chance to grill us then. If there are any burning questions as we go through, do stick your hand up and stop us. Similarly, if we use an acronym or a term that you don't know about, just do a diving tackle and shout out and stop us. So thank you for listening to me. I'm going to hand over to John.
Hi, I'm John. I always find it really funny when I get called an expert, because I'm just a kid from Birmingham who became an architect, and I've done some stuff, and here I am. You know, don't know how that happened, really, but anyway. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to think about Level 2. After the break, we'll talk a bit about Level 3, something called Digital Build Britain. And I'm also going to give you, at no charge to you, some resources to look at which will help you with different things. And it's all online stuff, all free downloads, and you can go and create a weekend's worth of reading overnight if you want to do that and be really sad, but that's okay. I think just to pick up on a few things that Fred was talking through in terms of the broader stuff that's going on is, you know, it comes back to why? Why is this so important? You know, why should we give about this at all? You know, what's driving this? I imagine we've all got one of these. The iPhone came out 10 years ago this year in January. And these things, and everything they symbolize, have changed our lives. They're changing our culture. They change the way we behave, you know, on the train, on the bus, do a head count around you of how many people are engaged with some form of technology. When you're walking down the street, check out how many people you bump into simply because they're doing this and they're walking. Is it that important? There's one country in the world or one city where they've installed airbags on lampposts to avoid people walking into them because they've got their heads down watching their smartphones. I kid you not. It's not an April Fool's. So this sort of digital stuff, it's infusing our entire lives. We live in a world that's already driven by data, but we don't really know it. And if you have a credit or debit card, you have a bank account, you use the email, internet, you text, WhatsApp, Snapchat, Instagram, whatever it is, there already is a huge digital footprint out there about you. And people using big data machines can do all their analytics, and they can predict where you're going to go on holiday next year, what kind of car you're going to buy, how many children you're going to have, and your inside leg measurement. So there's all that stuff already out there. And if I know just a few details about you, I can find out all sorts of information about you. And it's that sort of thinking that's coming into the construction industry. If we think about Facebook, Facebook founded 2005, is now the largest country in the world. It's got over 2 billion users. YouTube, I was just looking it up, isn't far behind, about 1.5 billion, so it's up there with China. So, you know, these are big numbers. These are influential numbers we're talking about. Our whole lives are becoming driven by data and tech, whether we like it or not. And the tide of this now is relentless. It's relentless. And you either surf it or you'll get sunk. It's that simple. And the issue we have now is all this stuff has migrated through all the other major industries like aerospace, petrochem, manufacturing, all sorts of stuff. Music, iTunes is a good one. Revolutionized the music industry almost overnight. Uber, Amazon are other great examples of digital disruptors with new business models. And this stuff is starting to seep its way into the construction industry. Our productivity is really poor. You know, on all sorts of metrics, our industry is in serious trouble. You only have to read the Farmer Report, which I'll mention later if you haven't come across it. So there's all sorts of stuff out there. We need to change. We need to be better. We need to be more efficient. We need to be more productive. We need to offer better careers to the young people coming through. Otherwise, there will be no industry. The ironic thing is the built environment is something that everybody engages with. You know, consciously or unconsciously. You know, we wake up in it, we go to bed in it, we work in it, we travel through it. You know, we're all experts on the built environment, just from a consumer perspective. So this whole digital thing is really, really important, and this is the context of what we're talking about, because other industries, other sectors want our data to do whatever they do, whether it's financial or people-driven or resources-driven. But because we don't work this way, we haven't got that data. So they'll do a fix. They'll get somebody else to do it for us if we don't change. And this stuff we're talking about isn't new. Nicholas Negroponte in the 1970s at MIT in the States was talking about digital architecture. You know, these concepts aren't new. BIM isn't new. Every other industry in the world has done it, except construction. You know, so we're just really, really late to the party. Boeing 777 is a very good example in the aerospace industry of an aircraft designed and constructed virtually using BIM in the 1990s. Go and Google it. Okay, so let's actually forget technology. Forget BIM, breathe a sigh of relief, and walk out the door. Don't worry about it. anything we design or manufacture or construct will have 4 basic stages. So a client or a customer wants something, so they produce a brief, they have a need. Somebody will design that, we procure that somehow, we buy it, we make it and build it, and then we hand it over and somebody operates it or uses it. We could be talking about a chair, a building, a train, a gas pipe, an oil rig, the space station, whatever you like, doesn't really matter. It's just this idea of an idea that becomes reality and then is used. So, you will know where you fit in that cycle. Some of us actually operate all the way around that cycle. Some of us may just focus on construction or design, but you know the kinds of things you do. You know the kind of people you talk to. You know the information you produce. You know the information that other people produce and what you do with it and the interactions that go on. So what we could do, we could take a few walls here and we could start mapping out all the information exchanges and transactions that happen through the entire process and all the different people that become involved at different stages. And that's BIM. We can do BIM on the back of envelopes because we're just modeling an information process, exchanging information, and moving the process forward. So we could do it all on the back of envelopes in analog world, and we could exchange envelopes and fill warehouses with them and have all the envelopes with all our information on for this project. In real BIM, if you like, we just happen to be doing it digitally. And because we're doing it digitally, we can do all sorts of clever things with it, like clash detection or simulation or animation or analysis, all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, forgetting all the technology, all we're talking about is how we use information and how all the stakeholders in a project use information. So, before you go and buy your first Revit license, and I promise not to use the R word too much, you need to understand first, before you start launching into some kind of BIM program, how do you use your information? Do you understand how your own business works and how your own role works? What information you need, what information you produce? How do other people use your information? What information do they need from you? What do you need from them? What interactions are there? Because I would suggest that until you understand how you work now properly and the information exchanges and how your information is structured, I wouldn't even bother trying to do BIM. You need to understand yourself first. It's not a question of just going out and buying a Revit or an ArchiCAD license or something and thinking, oh, we do BIM. So, moving this forward just a little bit. So just a heads up here, I'm not doing BIM 101 today. I'm actually focusing on level 2 and what that means. And so I'm not really doing a very broad conversation. But in terms of BIM, what we have at the heart of it is a very simple concept in that there is something sitting right at the center of the entire project life cycle that contains all the information and data about that project that's accessible then to every stakeholder who's involved in any stage of the process from start to finish. So you might have heard the phrase, the single source of truth, because that's where all the current information is, and anybody can dip into it anytime and get the information they need to do whatever they need to do. Of course, now this posits a few things, doesn't it? This assumes that we're all being open and transparent, that we're collaborating nicely, that we're sharing our information properly and not playing silly devils with it, and working for the benefit of the project. And I know that the transparency will give certain people issues, and we've had those conversations, but we can go into it later if you like. But at the heart of it, it's that utopian principle, if you like. Everything, all in the middle, shareable, transactionable by anybody in the process. And I believe BIM does act as a catalyst to do a number of things. But I think actually something else that BIM makes us do is act like real professionals, so that we actually take accountability for what we do with professional responsibility. Because when I put something in the center there, in the common data environment or the project BIM model, whatever you want to call it, I'm saying you can use that information for these purposes that I've specified. So I'm saying, yeah, that's up to date, you can use it. I'm not relying on the rest of the team to check it for me. The dynamic has changed. So I believe this whole thing, the cultural shift it starts to change, is instead of cutting corners all the time, finding ways out to avoid things, we actually act like real professionals, produce the goods, do the business, and own what we do. Because that's why we became what we are, isn't it? I don't know. So, this is the basic concept that we talk about. So the idea is, this stuff in the middle that we're talking about is composed of two things. Always draw a box. So we have 3D geometry, and we have data in a bucket. So we have 3D geometry, spatial geometry that we use for spatial coordination. And then we have data that can be embedded in the model as attributes, or it can sit on the side in a database, or it can be a combination of the two, and it can be interactive. But we've got graphical information and non-graphical information. And it looks like this. So we could be talking about building information modeling, or a model, bearing in mind, it's not just about buildings, is it? It could be about the oil rig, or the ship, or the space station, or the plane, or the gas pipe. It can be about infrastructure as well as buildings. It's around the entire life cycle. We're not just talking about design and construction. The term the British standards use, 1192, 2007 particularly, is the Common Data Environment, or the CDE, which is where all this information is held. So anybody use a project, 4 projects, Viewpoint? A-Site, Conject, BIW, any kinds of things. Yeah, okay, all those kinds of tools, they are CDEs. So if you're using that kind of tool already, check in the box. During the design and construction stage, the BIM model is known as the Project Information Model, the PIM. And once we've handed over to the client and done a full data handover to the client at the end of RBA stage 6, then the BIM model becomes known as the Asset Information Model. So we have this idea sitting in the middle, 3D geometry, data. In terms of the standards, that's known as 3D graphical data, and in terms of non-graphical data, that's the other term that's used. And that data that we've got there can cover all sorts of things about what we've got in the model in terms of performance characteristics, technical characteristics, the cost, who supplied it, how you replace it, its energy consumption, its technical performance, all sorts of stuff. So that's what we've got sitting in the center of that cycle. So here's a test. What is BIM Level 2? And what do we expect to see? So it's time for some audience participation. Don't look worried, it's okay. I'm very gentle. So, okay, I suspect most of us are all new to this, but okay, tell me what you think, okay, because you're probably right anyway, okay? So, if, say, we've got a project, and it's a level 2 project, and it's being designed and constructed, and we're told it's a level 2 project, what sort of things do we think are happening? What would we expect to see? Yeah? Okay. Okay. I like that word pre-agreed, actually. It's not, this isn't agree as you go. This is pre-agree. In terms of all the married people in the room? Married people? Okay. In this process, you have to get your prenup sorted out. Okay. Believe me, it will stand you in good stead. Okay. Okay, so I like that. I like that. You get an extra brownie point for that. Yeah, very good. Okay, next. Okay. Don't be shy.
Some form of integration between different sources of information.
Yeah. Like, what do you mean? Cool, okay. You mean people actually talking to each other? Yeah, cool, okay. So we're talking about collaboration, really. Moot point. Right, but we can come to that when we come to the maturity diagram. Okay, next one. Come on, there must be more here than this. Yes. Discipline models, very good. So we're thinking about L2, discipline models. Okay. And we talk about that a bit later as well. Okay, everybody's looking very serious, so I think better move on. Okay, but that's good. I think there's some good points raised there. So Fred mentioned the government construction strategy, which came out in 2011. And the GCS, as it's known at that time, talked about a number of initiatives in the public sector, but one of them wasn't all about BIM. But the mandate, as it became known, was for collaborative 3D BIM with all project and asset information, documentation and data being electronic or digital. And it set the target of April 2016 for all central funding government departments to be operating at level 2, whatever that means. Now, there's a couple of things to observe here. One is, when the GCS came out in 2011, the profile of public spending was quite different. So it's probably 40 to 50% of UK construction spend. According to latest figures, public sector spend in construction in the UK is now around about 25%. So the mandate, although influential, actually has decreasing influence in the marketplace, because we need the 75% of industry to step up now and embed this across the entire built environment industry. So we need a different kind of conversation. It's not about you must do this, because there's somebody going to wave a big stick. But actually, if you're working for a public sector department, you probably will have to do level 2 anyway. It goes with the territory. They produce their own employers' information requirements and procurement processes that tie in with that. So if you do public sector work at a sort of centrally funded government level, then you're committed to that anyway. But in the private sector, it's much more easy-ozy and, you know, so I think we have to start talking about the benefits and efficiencies we get out of this, the competitiveness it gives us. If we can create at least that 20% efficiency, then for a contractor, main contractor working in the private sector, that could be create the winning margin to win more work and put your competitors out of business or leave your competitors behind. So there are things to be used here that as a carrot that just help us do things better. Very simple things. It's not even to do with modeling. It's just simply organizing your information properly so you can find it. So you know you have it, you can find it easily, and you can easily exchange it with other people. And if everybody's using the same kind of system, it makes life so much easier rather than spending half a day thinking, I know there's a drawing or a detail on that, and I just can't find it. How much time do we waste trying to find the right information when if we could just use a CDE, Common Data Environment, properly, we just find it. You can search it. So that's sort of why this process started. And the funny thing here is you would think somebody put this all in place. And bearing in mind, we got some of the biggest brains in the UK working on this, okay, in terms of all this stuff. I'm not one of them. Then you would think they'd have said, okay, everybody's going to be doing level 2 by April 2016. We will define what it is, what it actually means. So I defy you to go and find that definition. It doesn't exist. In my experience, there are 4 ways of looking at what level 2 means, and these are they. So we're going to talk about something called maturity levels. We're going to talk about the standards and processes that we're going to have to use. We're going to look at what we produce in terms of outputs, and also, if you look at one of our favourite documents, PAS 1192 Part 2, page 9 in italics, which I'm sure we all know off by heart, there is actually a page that describes what a level 2 environment might look like, and I say might. So it's a sort of a picture. It's not definitive, but it gives us a clue. So what we can do is we can look across all of these things and have a view. And I think actually the simplest way to look at this is in terms of outputs. What do we get out of this? What do we produce? What happens? That's just the simplest thing. There's obviously a lot of stuff that goes around that, but we need to start somewhere. So this is what's known as the BIM maturity diagram, or the wedge, produced by Mark Bew and Mervyn Richards, who are among the leading figures in the UK BIM programme and the task group. We have at the top there a definition from the National Building Specification of what they think BIM is. A rich information model consisting of potentially multiple data sources, elements of which can be shared across all stakeholders and be maintained across the life of a building from inception to recycling. So there's a couple of things to notice there. Firstly, it doesn't really talk about 3D, does it? You know, it talks about an information-rich model. And the point to note here is when we use the word model in this kind of environment, we're using that word in its broadest sense. So we're not thinking literally just about a 3D model, but it could be a financial model, it could be a data model, it could be a performance model, it could be an environmental model, it could be all sorts of things. Doesn't necessarily have to be a piece of 3D geometry. Also, we've got multiple data sources, so we're pulling in data from all over the place and aggregating it and federating it. And we're sharing it across all the stakeholders through this CDE, this common data environment, and it's maintained across the entire life of a building from inception, when the thing's built and born, through all its useful life, till then it's demolished and recycled. And anything that happens in between, like alteration or refurbishment or extension or remodeling of any kind. So what the diagram does, it talks us through different levels of BIM. So we have here 4 levels at the moment. So we've got level 0 to level 3. And just for your excitement, you may not know, but there's a level 4, there's a level 5 coming over the hills, and there'll be various levels. They're just going to keep on coming now. So if you're starting out in your career, by the time I'm dead and gone, you'll be at level gazillion, I don't know, whatever it's going to be. It's just going to keep on going. But we'll explain how this works, because beyond level 3, it's actually, in a funny sort of way, I think it's just more and more of the same. But anyway, level 0 BIM, we're working in 2D, probably working in CAD, or if you're like me, working in pencil on tracing paper, because it's the only way I can do it. And we're producing drawings, we're using lines, we're using arcs, we're using text. And when we come to exchanging information with people in the team, we exchange paper. It's a paper-based system, 2D. In level 1, we're starting to do some 2D and 3D CAD. We might use some of the basic processes, like something called Avanti, if you've come across it, which is to do with collaboration process. We might use the base standard, BS 1192-2007, which is primarily about organizing information and how we structure and organize our information correctly. And we might be using other things. But we're starting to exchange information electronically. We're using files of some kind, and we're exchanging files with each other. But it's literally one-to-one. And this is why standards are so important. Man with the beard. Sorry, what's your name? Toby. Yep. Excellent. What do you do, Toby? That's unfortunate, but never mind. Yeah, okay. Okay, so we have Toby. Okay. And we have Toby in his world. And Toby's life is great. He's in his world, he's happy. So he can keep his socks in whatever order he wants. He can keep his magazines however he wants. He can mix up the colours of his shirts. He can talk in gibberish if he wants to himself. He can do all sorts of things. As long as he stays in his own world, he's fine. But the minute Toby wants to interact with David over there, international man of BIM, auditioning for the Milk Tray advert, then as soon as Toby wants to collaborate with David or communicate with David, there's a number, what's going on there? There's a number of things that need to happen, isn't there? For a start, they need to be talking the same language. They need to be using words in the same kind of way, so that when Toby talks about an apple, David understands it's an apple he's talking about, not a banana. So this whole communication is really important. Add in Fred, me, and all the other people we interact with in a project. And the problems or the potential, and we've all been there, potential for misinterpretation, confusion, ambiguity, incomplete information, inconsistent information. It just proliferates. So that's why we have standards, methods, and procedures, as they're called, SMP, because it lays down how we structure our information, how we communicate, how we understand each other in a consistent, unambiguous way. And this is why all the standards around this are so important. And which is why, when the standards first came out, everybody went into their own corner and said, we're going to start writing our own version 1192 Part 2. Why? Because the minute you do that, it's not a standard. So somebody working with you has got to work differently to the way they work with somebody else. The whole point of having standards is that they are standards and we work the same way. And the problem we're facing, and this is where BIM is a bit of a schoolmaster, is historically the construction industry is ridiculously poor at using information. Everybody has their own system. Everybody has their own way of doing things. It's tremendously inefficient, creates barriers, silos, and all sorts of problems. So that's why when we get into a level 2 environment, we need all these different standards that I'm going to talk about in place to govern all the transactions that are taking place in terms of information. So we're getting apples and apples and bananas and bananas and oranges and oranges, and we're not mixing them up. So in a level 2 environment, and somebody mentioned it already, level 2 is just like the way we work now, in the sense that an architect produces their model and information or data, structural engineer produces their model and data, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, piling, frame, cladding, whatever you want. Everybody produces their own model and information to go with it. So that's why level 2 is a federated or composite environment, because what we're doing, we're taking, using a tool like Celebri or Navisworks or Tekla BIM site. It's one of these aggregation tools or platforms that we bring the models together into a federated or composite model, and then we can start to do stuff with it, like do clash detection, like do some simulation or analysis, or turn it into a 4D model, so we put time against it. So there's all those kinds of things. So in terms of level 2, we've got all the different disciplines and subcontract packages running in their own lane, and then we take them all together and turn it into a federated model. So in terms of what we're doing, we're sharing files, we're collaborating through a common data environment, so we're all uploading our information to the common data environment, and everybody takes out of that what they want. And also, because we're working digitally now, we can start to have libraries of information sitting in the background. So if you work on a school, why do we redesign a typical toilet block or space every time? Why do we redesign a classroom every time? Surely there's an optimum layout that we can adjust to particular conditions. Surely we can then start to tie in supply chain and the products that we know are reliable and the design details that we know that work and provide a good fit for what we're trying to achieve. And some retailers are already doing this. they have vast libraries of all the kit and stuff that goes into their stores, so that their designers and supply chain and contractors take that information, incorporate it into their project model, and with that comes a whole load of data, like performance, cost, lead-in time, installation requirements, whatever you want. So there's a standard kit. You know, Marks and Spencer is a good example of this. But it's tied into their supply chain agreements as well. So they've done a deal with the supplier of a particular chiller unit. All their data and information and geometry is in the library. It's used on their projects. Then they find there's a better performing one, or a cheaper one, or a better one, or they fall out with that particular supplier. So his stuff is scrubbed from the library. They bring in the new supplier on a new supply chain agreement, and that stuff is used in the models. So this is where some of the efficiencies start to come in terms that we're not reinventing the wheel all the time. It's not stifling creativity, but it's taking some of the mechanical stuff out of the process that helps us leap forward on the next project. So level 2, federation, disciplines, collaboration, and libraries and all that kind of stuff. And there's all sorts of tools now to do all kinds of things that we think about. Level 3, I'll talk about this after the break. It's this concept of integrated BIM, whatever that means, and interoperability and all those sorts of things, and we'll talk about that after the break. The main thing is to remember here a couple of basic tenets, and you can say that John Eynon said this, so you can send them to my door, and I don't care. One is the level 3 task group has only just started work. So level 3 standards will only start to appear around about 2019, 2020. So I would suggest to you that we have enough issues trying to get level 2 sorted, which is where I'm coming from. The second thing is people will turn up on your doorstep saying, oh, we did level 2 a long time ago. We're on to level 5 now. BS. You know, level 3 might exist conceptually, but in terms of process, standards, and all that stuff, no. They're lying, or they're mistaken. So you can boot them out the door as far as I'm concerned. So it's level 2 or bust at the moment, and this is where the UK BIM Alliance comes from. I'll explain why that's so important later, but for the moment, level 2 sets up the playing field, the platform for us to move forward as an industry into a digital future. And that's why we have to nail it. Everybody has to nail it. It's why it's so important. It provides the platform. It's only a stop on the journey, yes, but it's a gate we all have to go through to migrate into the green fields of level 3 and beyond, and all that stuff. Okay. Okay, this is another way of looking at it now. So we're thinking about standards. There are, it's a little bit of a fudge, this, so I'm just letting you in on the secret. But I'm updating this at the moment, but it's 8 main pillars of level 2. And we'll just run through them very briefly. All the information here is available on one of the websites for free. If you really want to read all the standards, you can do it. So we have PAS 1192 Part 2, which is to do with design and construction. PAS 1192 Part 3, which is to do with asset management. BS 1192 Part 4, which is to do with something called COBE, which is simply to do with how we exchange information in and out of the model and with each other. PAS 1192 Part 5, which is to do with digital security. PAS 1192 Part 6, which is to do with risk and health and safety management in BIM world. And then we have the CIC BIM protocol, which is a contract appendix that fits with any of the contracts that we use in the UK. It's a contract appendix entirely to set out the BIM requirements for the project. Then we have BS 8536 Part 1, which is primarily about asset management and something called government soft landings, which, if you're familiar with the concept of soft landings from BISWIA, it's just a continuation of that. So it's about preparation for handover and commissioning process and how we deal with aftercare and all that kind of thing. And then finally, you have the NBS BIM Toolkit, which deals with two things. One is classification, so calling apples, apples, and pears, pears. And secondly, to do with the developing the plan of work for your project or for your practice or for your business, which can set up then the milestones in the design process and the construction process, and how BIM and working in a digital environment ties in with that. You then have some foundational standards as well, which is all these. The main one being BS 1192-2007, which sets out the main principles around managing information on projects and how we work in a common data environment. And if you're interested, there is BS 7000 Part 4, which is to do with the design management process and how the process of construction design management works. The others are basically QA standards that you'll be familiar with. Remind me tomorrow, I think. Okay. So that's it. So I would, it depends really what you do and where you fit within the cycle in terms of how much of this stuff you need to engage with. But I think there is, unfortunately, and I can make no apology here, if you're serious about doing this stuff, then you have to engage with things like this. There's no shortcut. It's not like reading the blurb on the back of a book. You know, you've got to at least have a passing knowledge of how it all fits together. You don't need to necessarily know the detail. Depends how it applies to you. And if we had longer, then we can look at how particular things might apply to you in your situation. And what I can do is, one of the resources I'm going to show you later is a little tool you can use which will help you understand how this applies individually to you right now. And it's a sort of glass of wine job. Sit down with a spreadsheet for one evening, bottle of red, and job done. You know, you'll have your plan to go forward. I tend to think of things in terms of bottle of wine, so it's probably at least a one bottle job, possibly two, who knows. Okay, then I'm sure you all know this anyway, but if we go to PAS 1192 Part 2, which is to do with design and construction, we go to page 9, it lists these things that might be a characteristic or a hallmark of a level 2 environment. So production of definition models, that's basically just saying we're producing models, basically, you know, in simple terms. So it uses the word definition because it's another way of describing the design process that we go through. Because as we go through the design process, we're going from the very generic through to the very specific to the most accurate. So what it could be said is, as we go through the design process, we're defining the project in more and more detail with more and more accuracy. So we're producing definition models, which we are. We have something called an EIR, which is the Employer's Information Requirements, which I'm going to talk about in more detail later, but it's simply a statement from the client at the start of the project that says, in terms of BIM, this is how I want it to work on the project, this is the information I want, this is the format I want it in, these are the milestones where I want that information, and this is what I'm going to do with it. It has been said that without an EIR on your project, you cannot achieve level 2. And there's good reasons for saying that. So we'll talk about that a bit later. You will have, for a level 2 environment, you will have the BIM protocol, which is the contract. So we would expect the BIM requirements to be embedded in the main contract, and deeds of appointment for consultants, supply chain agreements, subcontract packages, the lot. Capability assessments, this is part of the process of producing a BEP, which is a BIM execution plan. And this is just saying what is the capability of the team. And again, going back to that pre-agreed point, it's quite handy if we know at the start, as a team, what we're capable of and what our resources are. So working with one local authority, they won't use Viewpoint, full stop. Okay, so how are we going to issue information to you and get approval in a certain turnaround? So that's one of the issues. So understanding, so the whole point of capability assessments isn't to catch people out. It's so you can actually make sure that you will succeed as a team. Understanding where each other's strengths and weaknesses are, whether we use different kinds of software that don't talk to each other, or we've got a small pipe into the office so we can only have a 2 megabyte file, I don't know, whatever it is, but it's all those kinds of things. So it helps us understand how as a team we can deliver the employer's information requirements. And the BIM execution plan that we produce at pre-contract and post-contract is our statement as a project team of saying to the client, yes, we understand your employer's information requirements, and this BIM execution plan demonstrates not only the capability of our team, but it tells you, Mr. Client, how we're going to deliver what you want and all the steps that we're going to go through in that process. If you have a level 2 project, you've probably got a CDE, and we should know by now that that is a common data environment, something like Viewpoint or A-Site or that thing. SMP, which I've mentioned before, which is why it's so important, standards, methods and processes or procedures. Agreeing right at the start, what standards are we going to use? What are we going to standardize on? What processes are we going to have in place to do whatever we've got to do? Yes, we'll be producing information models and enabling tools. At the end of RBA Stage 6, in all likelihood, if it's a full Level 2 project, we will be delivering a coordinated project information model to the client for their use, and that'll be some 3D geometry and a whole load of data, whether that's in COBE, IFC, or whatever they want. And we'll be doing some data exchanges. So we might be using COBE, we might be using PDFs, we might be using IFC, we might be exporting native geometry from a Revit platform or an ArchiCAD platform and giving it to them so they can use that stuff as well. So these are some characteristics of the things we could expect on a Level 2 project according to PAS 1192 Part 2. And finally, in terms of outputs, I think this is the simplest and best way of thinking about it. So there's 5 things to think about in terms of Level 2. Common data environment. So if you've got A-Site or 4 projects, tick in the box. Some formal method of exchanging data, whether that's through COBE or some other prescribed method, doesn't really matter, but you need to have that nailed down and a protocol in place for that process. You will produce drawings because under Level 2, when it came out in 2011, it always envisaged at that point that contracts would still be formed on the basis of drawings. I have heard of cases recently where, I don't know, David might be able to help on this, where actually the contract is being formed on the basis of the model instead of the drawings, sometimes, yeah, or sometimes on the model and the drawings, in which case you have to establish a hierarchy. Model should take precedence, I would think. But so there's some movement on this one, which is interesting. You'll have a commercial suite, so there's going to be some kind of contract, whether it is using the BIM protocol or something the client's team have written, or they've just embedded it in the main contract somehow. And then you might have the supporting documents like an EIR, an asset information requirement, and possibly a BIM execution plan. And then there might be some geometry that we export as well. So we produce native files out of Revit or ArchiCAD or Tekla. We might turn those into IFCs, industry foundation classes. That's the building smart format. There's all sorts of things that we could potentially do. But basically, there's these 5 things that would be the key hallmarks of a level 2 environment. And obviously behind this, there's still all the standards, methods, and procedures we'd be using that govern how all these things are done and how they work. So just to quickly, we've got 10 minutes, I think, is that right? Yeah, good. I'm on target. Amazing. Okay. So without really doing this to death, but we're going to do it to death. Let's do it to death. So if we think of the project process, stage 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So project information in design and construction, asset information model in handover operations sort of life cycle. In terms of the process we're going through, we're focused on what's going to happen there. Because the whole thing is set up in terms of what are we going to deliver at handover in terms of the deliverable. And on a full level 2 project, it'll be the old geometry plus data. And that needs to be defined. But I'm sure, as David will say, your process has to be set up to deliver that stuff in the right way. And you can only do that at the start. And that's why the EIR is such an important document. And this is taken directly from the standards. So this is from PAS 1192, Part 2. So it's literally a copy and the paste, so you can look it up for yourself. But the idea is the employer's information requirement, pre-tender document setting out the information to be delivered, and the standards and processes to be adopted by the supplier as part of the project delivery process. So in contractual terms, and this may be a little bit too much for some people, but bear with me. So you might be familiar with the term ERs, employers' requirements, and CPs, contractors' proposals. And employers' requirements is what the client puts out to tender to the main contractor or their suppliers, saying, this is what I want, time, cost, quality, please, what are you going to do for me? And the contractor's proposals is what the contractors or suppliers submit to supply that requirement. And usually, in forming a contract, there's a bit of going and forward to finally agree the main contract. The EIR is part of the same conversation, or should be. So, sitting in the employer's requirements somewhere, there should be an EIR. There might even be an AIR, which is the asset information requirement. And that's the information that the client needs to run the facility once it's completed. And that information might be, as a requirement, might be embedded in the EIR, or it might be produced as a separate document. It doesn't really matter. Supplier's team produce the BEP. And what we're saying here is the BIM execution plan, BEP, which is submitted firstly pre-contract to address the issues raised in the EIR, and then with more detailed post-contract award to explain the supplier's methodology for delivering the project using BIM. And the BEP is the answer to the EIR. It's the how and the what and the when. Because a lot of everything we do comes down to answering very simple questions. Who's doing it? When are they doing it? What are they doing? How are they doing it? How much is it going to cost? When can I have it? What is it they're going to give me? So, you know, I know we talk a lot of gobbledygook, but a lot of this we just make too complicated. It all boils down to very, very simple questions. You know, that's it. So think of that four-stage diagram I talked about, the information exchange. What information do I want from this person? How can they give it me? Oh, it might be a digital format. Shall I have a native file? Shall I have an IFC? Shall I have a COBE? What can I do with it? What do I need to do with it? All these sorts of questions. But you start with the information. So the BEP is the supply team's answer to the client's question. And going back to Toby's point is it's vital. It's more than life and death. For God's sake, sort this out before you start the project or in the very early doors. Because trying to agree all this when you're 12 months down the line is seriously painful. And if you get to handover or just before it, and suddenly the client's project manager says, oh, by the way, this is a level 2 project. You're supposed to be giving me this, and this in these formats to go over to the facilities management system. What? I didn't allow for doing that. I've got no money in to do that. I've got no resources. These questions are fundamental to navigating the process, getting the right destination in view, and achieving that handover. So the standards give you a lot of guidance, and there's plenty of guidance you can get on how an EIR, employer's information requirement, is structured, and it should cover these kinds of things. This format is within PAS 1192 Part 2. Also tells you how a BEP should be structured, and a post-contract BEP actually adds in this information as well. Sometimes as part of a tender, the client will issue a pre-contract BEP to say, this is what we want your BEP to look like. Usually D&B, design and build, the contractor would probably lead this process. And that's sort of round about it. So I'm just, for this point, so the EIR is a crucial document. So if the client doesn't give you one because they haven't got a clue, or they don't know what they're talking about, I would suggest for everybody's safety and comfort, you need to agree something with them. And I've done this now a few times where clients said to us, we want to do level 2, we don't know what it means, we don't even know what we want. Can you sort something out for us? So we say, right, we will need to agree an employer's information requirement with you. We have a template, we'll write it for you, you can sign it off, and then we all know where we are. Then we can build that into our fees or our costs in terms of delivering that information. Everybody knows what they're aiming at, and then there's going to be no unfortunate arguments or misconceptions towards the end of the job. It's really, really important now with this whole process that we start to do the right things at the right time. This is good because it's making us do the job properly, but it's what we should have always been doing. So I think I'll just leave it there, and it's time for coffee, I think.
Yeah, huge thanks, John, for what was an hour run through, and to you guys for listening. That was a lot of stamina, so well done. We have It's coffee time, thank God. I didn't mean that at you, sorry. Yeah, so just, I know it's a bit brief. We're going to have 15 minutes because we've got quite a lot to get through because we've got so much knowledge to impart to you. So we can back in here for sort of quarter past. It would be fantastic. Cheers, guys. Thank you.
There's one thing I wanted to say before we get into level 3 and a bit about what it's all about, as much as we know at this point. I don't mind, but do it outside. Okay, thank you. We're living in, it's like we're living right in the middle of an experiment. Back in the old days, when I was a young lad, then something like this, the boffins would go into a darkened room, they'd work away for 10 years on it, then suddenly one day, eureka, they'd come out and say, here's the solution to everything. What we've got at the moment now, because of all this social media stuff that young'uns like Fred are into, you know, and all this kind of thing, we know about everything in intense detail as soon as it happens. So we're seeing the development of this approach across our industry, warts and all, on a day-by-day, blow-by-blow basis. And that's why sometimes it feels so painful, because it's like we're all part of an open experiment and we have total visibility of everything that's going on. And a lot of it, all the stuff we're talking about, and I'm sure that David will say this, even now, their business processes are still a work in progress. They're always learning, always developing, finding new ways to improve and do things better, and all sorts of things. And all this process is happening all around us, and we're hearing all about it, which is why it can get so frustrating sometimes, because we're overloaded with stuff. And it's just continually moving. But this is, unfortunately, the way life is now. We are living in this goldfish bowl of data and information all around us. And we have this visibility. It's making us more accountable. People can point fingers, you know, all that kind of thing, you know. But at the end of the day, it's all around us now. We can't turn the tide back. We have to swim with it. And this is why we have to change. So thinking about level 3, we have this idea of an industry in transition, moving through the different levels of BIM that we've talked about in terms of the maturity diagram, the wedge that we saw before the break. And it's rather like the different industrial revolutions we've had. You may have come across the word Industry 4.0, and we are living now through the fourth, right in the middle of the fourth industrial revolution. First industrial revolution was about steam power and creating electricity. Second industrial revolution was about how that then could be harnessed for mass production and manufacturing, things like the Model T Ford, for instance. You can have any colour you like as long as it's black, because that's all they could cope with at the time. You know, third industrial revolution, early 70s, starting to have the impact of computing power and PCs and all that sort of stuff. And the fourth industrial revolution, where we are now, is just basically the impact of data and connection and being a data-driven industry. So, you know, it's all those sorts of things we have to deal with, and this is this progression we're going through. And whilst level 2 could be seen as looking at how we improve productivity, level 3 is really not so much about what it is, but what it means to everybody else, in terms of what impact then does all this stuff start to have on communities, society, industry at large, the world, and how we manipulate it and control it and manage it, all those kinds of things. So as you've seen, there's this progression through the different levels, and on level 3 on the maturity diagram we have the idea of IBIM. I stands for integrated, and it's this concept of having somehow everything integrated together, whatever that means. So it's sort of like this, and these are only concepts. So So I wouldn't even worry about it too much at the moment, but this is just for information. So at level 2, we have our different disciplines, engaging with a CDE, Common Data Environment, and we have a federated position. So we've got all the different disciplines, and they're still individual disciplines. In level 3, somehow, it's all integrated. It's one place. Is it one place? We're putting all this stuff in the cloud. So, as of now, if you've got data in, say, Dropbox or A-Site or for project, where is it? Is it in the UK? Or is it in a server farm in Guatemala? Or in Mexico? Who knows? We're putting all this stuff in the cloud, but we don't know where it is. An interesting point here, just to keep you awake at night, if you lost everything today, and you're working on a project, do you know the recovery protocols for your data and information? How quickly can you be up and running again as a business if your office burnt down and you lost your entire computer network? What third-party agreements are in place with your service providers or your data storage people to give you that data back? And if you're in the habit of signing contracts to doing work, you may well find there's a little clause in there somewhere about keeping your client's data secure and safe. How safe and secure is it? Do you know? Hand on heart. Yeah. You know, so these are the real sorts of issues we start to be thinking about, because sooner or later we're all going to get hacked. You know, and it's just on the rise. So we have this idea in level 3 of somehow everything being integrated. Now, whether that's all in one place, or whether actually this is more about connection, I think, and networking and interoperability and the seamless transfer of data across databases, across disciplines, across anything, into other enterprise systems that businesses and our clients have. So it's just seamless transfer of data, and we'll have tools that aggregate and search and mine and collect and pull stuff together so we can do with it whatever we want. Whether it's all in one place or whether it's in lots of places and we have the tools to get it together, I don't think it's actually going to matter as long as we can do the job. So it's this sort of thinking behind level 3 that's going on. The working groups have only just started in the last 6 months. About 18 months ago, if you're interested, there is this report produced by Digital Build Britain, which is the level 3 strategy. It's still available. It's a free download as PDF. And I think actually the vision of this is breathtaking, because already in terms of UK BIM Level 2, we have a position of leadership in the world, and this puts us in a leadership position in the global information economy. So this is serious business, and particularly with Brexit, actually, this becomes even more important. Unfortunately, knowing what these guys are like, you get funky diagrams like this. So I'm not going to bore you trying to explain this, because I'm not even sure I could do it myself. But what we're trying to talk about here is, it's really, if you think of a level 2 plus with bells and whistles, then it's starting to think about regional, national, global impact of this stuff, and the interplay between capital delivery, operational activity, and how we manage performance through big data across all those things like people, power, water, transportation, buildings. And down here in the small print here, we have building information modeling. So there's lots of, these guys love to draw their interesting diagrams, and here's another one. So even level 3 has different levels, you'll be pleased to know. So just to make life even more complicated, so the first step in level 3 is effectively a level 2 plus. And then actually, as you read about this and follow it through, the next levels, level 3, level 4, 5, and so on, It's really more about the widening impact and influence of this stuff and how it makes our lives and communities and the built environment work. So, but as I said, this is at least a few years away yet. Please focus on getting level 2 right, and then the rest of this will be a piece of cake. We'll just march through into it. This is something David Phil wrote, who's one of the Digital Build Britain team. He wrote in BIM Plus, which is an online BIM magazine, a few weeks ago. The Level 3 program is a cross-sectoral digital transformation program for the full life cycle of the built environment to increase productivity, there's that buzzword again, improve economic and social outcomes. Level 3 is not purely BIM, rather it is part of a wider building environment digitisation. So that's what I'm saying, it's about the broader impact of how all this stuff does and how it works and the outcomes. It will create the framework, standards, guidance, deliver pilots and outline the industry change needed for how information about all assets in the built and interface to the natural environment are planned and used to perform their functional service and provide socio-economic benefit, creating the right things with better outcomes. These guys can't talk in short sentences and they always use lots of buzzwords, but basically what we're talking about here is the Digital Build Britain team that's now in existence, led by Mark Bew and David, have various working groups in place. They're going to be producing standards guidance on different aspects of this, how we help move industry forward to change and digitise the built environment. You can look that up, the link is there when we get back to it. So coming back to level 2, if you remember before the break, we looked at different ways of looking at this. I think the simplest way is to just think in terms of the outputs and what we're doing. We looked at the maturity diagram, which helps us define the different levels of BIM. We looked at the standards and processes we might use. We looked at the standard and some of the things that tells us a level 2 environment might contain. And we have the outputs. So I think really one question I imagine might be running through somebody's head is, well, that's really good, John. I'm so excited. But where the hell do I start? Where do I start? Don't go and buy your R license. Start with your information. Understand whatever your role, whatever your business, wherever you are in the food chain and the process of delivery of a project. Understand the mechanics of what information you use, how you use it, how other people in your team or the people you work with use the information you produce, and then what happens to it. Understand that information trail and those information exchanges that you have with different people. Put in place some kind of intranet or management system or whatever to organize and structure your information. Use BS 1192-2007 to structure your process and your document conventions. I work with one particular firm of architects, I won't name them, but they are absolutely exemplary in this. Every single thing, it's not David actually. It might, actually I don't work with you, so I don't know. But these guys, every single piece of information that comes out of their office is coded to 1192-2007. You know, faultless, disciplined, relentless. And it pays dividends because you can find everything and you know what it's for and you know what it's called and it's got the right terminology. You know, it just makes life so much easier. You know, and as more and more people start to do that, then if we could just structure our information consistently across the industry, we would save probably at least 20 to 30% of our time. I think Viewpoint did a study on this, a white paper on this, only a month ago, on finding information. Mervyn Richards will say, in all his experience, information on projects is generally ambiguous, incomplete, and inconsistent. And that's where a lot of our waste comes from. If we could just learn to use information properly and actually produce a properly 3D coordinated design, forget the rest of it. If we could do that, we would save at least 25% of our time and reduce all our costs and increase our profit at a stroke. Because most of the crap that happens on sites is because of things going wrong, because they haven't been coordinated properly, or things have been wrongly specified, or the information's been wrong. Somebody's used an out-of-date drawing, or out-of-date information, or whatever it is. And so something gets built wrong, it has to be put right, and then you've got the loss of time, loss of money, all those sorts of issues. This is I say it's a really easy fix. I know it's not, but actually we can't begin to do the rest of this properly if we haven't got this process and this discipline in place. So I think that's the key to this, is getting your platform of information right and understanding how you're doing things. So I'm just going to quickly whiz through resources for 10 minutes. So this is the first one. This is the BIM Level 2 website run by the British Standards Institution. Here you can download all the Level 2 standards for free as PDFs. And they're continuing to add other guidance and bits and bobs there. So that's one of your first ports of call. Another one is the task group website. This website will be disappearing soon, but what there is on here is if you have a ferret around, there's a very useful guide to writing the employer's information requirements and plain language questions, which are the tools you use to produce an employer's information requirement. So there's lots of free stuff you can download from here. It's worth having a ferret around. I've got to be honest, it's a hopelessly organised site. So you do have to trawl around it, but there are nuggets in there you can get your hands on. Next one is the MBS BIM Toolkit. This was funded by £1 million from Innovate UK, and it does two main things, although it's starting to do a lot more things now. One is it gives you the Uniclass classification, so any component or system in a model, you can apply the correct coding to it, and that helps in the specification process and the costing process. And also you can produce a plan of work for your project, which defines all the outcomes. It also helps you produce some of the key documents. You can also have a play with it and do theoretical projects and all sorts of stuff. It's free to use, and it will be free to use in perpetuity. That's part of the deal. It's just a simple login to create your own account. Have a play with it. It's worth getting to know, because there's lots of good stuff there. And that helps you deal with a couple of the pillars of BIM. And then there's these. This is Bond Bryan, our firm of architects you may have heard of. They produce here a couple of guides which are like gold. These are free. They are kept up to date. We have a BIM dictionary and BIM acronyms. And the beautiful thing about these documents is they are locked into UK standards terminology. So any of the terms in the standards, you can look up what the acronym is or look up what the term is, and it will give you a plain language definition. Hallelujah. So you can download this as a PDF, and it's worth, if you're starting out and trying to understand, well, what the hell is a MIDIP or a TDIP or a BEP or this or that, then this is the place to go. Worth the weight in gold. It's free. It's up to date. Da-di-da. Okay, next one, UK BIM Alliance. I'm the engagement lead for the UK BIM Alliance. We've been going just over a year. We are the go-to people for implementing Level 2 in the UK, as the UK BIM Task Group has pretty well moved on to Level 3. apart from their public sector working group led by Terry Stocks. So we are beginning to act as an umbrella organisation across the UK to help industry implement level 2. We're doing research projects. We're trying to start to provide training and resources. We've just announced that we're merging, Building Smart are merging with us, Building Smart UK, which is the patron or the host of IFCs and all that sort of open BIM stuff that I've been talking about. So we're trying to build some momentum and a focus for leadership in terms of the UK for level 2. And that's our prime focus at the moment. I'm also part of what's called BIM regions. So just a show of hands here, who's involved with their local BIM regions group? Shame on you. No, seriously, shame on you. So BIM regions is a national network across the UK including Southern Ireland. And we have a network of local groups led by BIM champs like myself. Generally, our meetings are free. You will find details on here. We have a diary on here. If you want to sponsor us, you're welcome to give us cash to help fund what we do. That's good. And you'll get some advertising and stuff in return for that. Same for the Alliance, actually, as well. We need your support. But basically, the regions have local meetings happening all over the place, all of the time. Go along. You will meet people just like you. It's not for experts. It's for people to rub shoulders, share their experience, and say, "Oh, I've got a problem on this job. Oh, I had that," and talk about solutions and that sort of thing. So there's usually interesting stuff going on. If anybody's based in the southeast, I've just launched a group in Cobham. If you're interested in that, we've got a meeting coming up in a couple of weeks. You're welcome to attend. Just talk to me afterwards. That's fine. But if you go to the regions website, you will find under the regions and resources lists of all our contacts. You will find somebody local to you. There is an active London group based at the University of Westminster. So, we're all over the place. And then there's these guys. I don't know anything about these people at all, so I'll just move on. It's been a privilege to work with Fred over a number of years now, and I think what these guys are achieving in terms of reach and influence is superb, and I think the thing for Fred and Tom as they've built this is their passion and determination and vision has not flinched once, and in the face of all sorts of odds. And I think it's what I get frustrated with about our industry sometimes is when something is so blindingly obviously good for the benefit of industry, why won't people support it? What is wrong with us? But that's a discussion for a beer. But no, there we go. We need to change. And, the reason you're here is because you're interested. And every one of you in this room, you need to lean in and step up. It's not just about you. It's about the impact you can have on industry and the kind of industry you can create. What kind of industry do you want? For yourself, for your children, for the legacy that we leave? Is it just every man for himself or every woman for herself? I don't know. There are all sorts of BIM 4 groups. We have BIM for SME, for instance. There's BIM for retail, there's BIM for clients. And again, you'll find details on the UK BIM Alliance website and the BIM Regions website. Digital Build Britain I've talked about. This one's an interesting one, cpic.org.uk. If you're stuck and you need a BIM execution template or a capability assessment template to do the BIM execution plan process, you can find the templates here. They're free to use, and they're written by Mervyn Richards and Stuart Chalmers, so they are good stuff. Mervyn's author of 1192-2007, and Stuart is a leading figure now at BRE. So these are free-to-use templates, open license. If you get stuck, go here. It's a good place to start. And I'm on the last couple now, so I'm okay. This one, I talked about an assessment tool. This is a very simple assessment tool. But what this does, it's called the BIM Delivery Cube. It's free to use. And it's a series of sort of spreadsheet type things. It helps you understand who you are in the process in terms of, are you a client? Are you a designer? Are you a contractor, supplier, facilities manager, whatever? Then asks you what kind of place in the process do you have? Do you focus on design, pre-construction, construction, aftercare, that kind of thing? And then it talks through the different aspects of that. So let's take a designer, and let's say you're interested in pre-construction. Then it will help you identify in BIM world what kind of things can you do with BIM. It will then help you identify what kind of benefits can you create doing those things for yourself and for your clients. It will then help you identify what the cost of getting those tools might be, what those tools are that you might need. It's not software specific, it's generic, but it will give you some guidance. It will then tell you what that cost might be. It will then tell you what training and support you need to do all that stuff. So very quickly, you can go through this analysis tool, and it will give you a little picture of how you might look in the world of BIM, what training you might need, what tools you might need, the kinds of things you can do, how much it might cost. So this is at least one bottle of red in the evening, but job done, because once you've done this, you will have a little sheet that summarizes the benefits you can create, what you can do, what it's going to cost. It's the start of your BIM, your personal BIM implementation plan. And that could be equally for yourself as an individual or for your business, for your organization. So it's a really good piece of kit, this. It's free, it's under-publicized, but it's well worth the effort. And finally, just before I go now, a few broader things to think about. I remember I talked about the Farmer report. It came out just over a year. Mark did a review of our industry. He's coming to my common group in a couple of weeks' time to talk about this report. So it's going to be a really good evening, I think. And he highlighted all these different issues that face us. BIM isn't actually the answer to everything, or necessarily to all of these things, but BIM is a bit of a catalyst for change and thinking about what we do and starting to move us along in the right path. You may have come across an organisation called MACE. They're a big main contractor and management consultancy. They've recently published this report, literally in the last few weeks, about Industry 4.0 and the skill shortage and what we need to do. Everybody writes about, oh, we're going to lose 500,000 jobs because of robots taking over. Nobody talks about actually what are the opportunities we're going to create. Because other industries have been through exactly this process. Automation, robotics, all that sort of stuff. But the technology change, other industries, coding, all sorts of opportunities, different business models, there's all sorts of stuff going on. And then on a global scale, if you're interested in the broader context and how this is affecting our world, McKinsey produce all sorts of reports along this line all the time. And it's happening all over the world. We're part of a global movement now. It can't be avoided. Closer to home, just get a subscription to Wired or check in the Wired website. I think the interesting thing for me now is the crossover between different sectors and industries, technology crossover, 3D printing is being used in the medical profession as much as in the building industry. There's all sorts of things going on, and vision of the future. And there's an unashamed plug here for my 2 books, available on Amazon, and you can contribute to my Caribbean holiday. I wrote a manual on design management, construction design management a few years ago, and there is the BIM handbook published last year with a number of contributors across industry, including Fred on social media. There is also this, this is available, this is free. This is, I've written this about UK BIM Level 2. It's available on Fred's website, B1M, BIM for Beginners. I'm a few days behind. I was hoping to have the 5th update ready for today, and it's not, but I'm literally a few days away of uploading it. And this talks you through everything I've talked about today, plus a load more in a bit more detail. So there's a bit of guidance about the standards, some of the process, and bits and bobs. So, and that's just a free download through Fred's website, and there is a version there. It's a little out of date at the moment. If you give it about a week, version 5 will be up there, and you can download to your heart's content. Circulate it, print it off, use it, abuse it, do what you want. It's yours to use. Okay? So there's no rights on it. It's an open license. And finally, and I'm 2 minutes over, sorry. Things to watch. Because again, if you're in anybody below 40, you cannot avoid any of this stuff now. And in fact, anybody over that age, you can't avoid it either. So thinking about digital built environments in the industry, just generally BIM, digital stuff, augmented reality, virtual reality, all this 3D goggles stuff, whatever, holograms, all sorts of things. Internet of Things, Internet of Everything, just this idea of smart cities, the smart cities movement and the standards that have come out, this whole idea of your fridge talking to the supermarket saying, Sarah's run out of milk, please send some on the next delivery, da-da-da-da-da. Or the bus stops talking to each other about the queues or the traffic or the accident. All this kind of smart data stuff. You know, there's going to be over 50 billion devices connected to the Internet of Things by 2020. That's 7 for every one of us on the planet. You know, just think about it. It's crazy. We're going to become more and more mobile in terms of our technology. We're going to use the cloud more and more. We're going to be more and more connected. The sale of mobile chips now is outpacing the sale of static desktop chips by a lot. So, you know, we're moving down this. Everything's going to become smarter, faster, smaller, more connected all the time. 3G, 4G, 5G, whatever G it will be. Because computing power is going up and we have these vast processing machines now, we can process billions of data transactions to do all this big data stuff. And we've not really seen it applied much in the construction industry yet, but it's coming. So the idea of being able to evaluate in real time the performance of your building, or the performance of your people, or the performance of a subcontractor, or the performance of a chiller unit, or a building system, whatever, you know, clients, facilities managers, all sorts of people will be able to extract all sorts of data about the thing that we've built for them, and have a conversation around that. Or maybe just in terms of what we're doing, the processes we use, all that sort of stuff. And as I said, also, the technology crossover now, it's happening all the time between different industries. Other industries want our data, we need their data, all that kind of stuff. And that's me done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. We're now going to introduce David Miller of David Miller Architects, who's going to talk to you about how he put some of that theory into practice. David.
Okie doke. What Fred's asked me to talk about is how we've, at DMA, we've effectively reimagined our business around a BIM workflow. And to give you a little bit of context, we're a smaller architecture practice based not too far away from here in Fitzrovia. And we're very typical of a smaller architecture practice. Our workload is very typical. We do schools, we do housing, both social and developer housing. It's a very normal architecture practice. But the commercial context that we're working in gave us real pause for thought. So we realized that we've got 32 other architecture practices with exactly the same postcode as us. And we think within a couple of streets of where we are, there's 1,000 qualified architects. So we're operating in an incredibly competitive environment. We're also aware that we're working in a procurement system that is increasingly seeing smaller organizations as risky. And also a procurement ecosystem that's starting to salami slice up the workflow so that they're re-procuring at different stages. So for a smaller practice that's ambitious and wants to grow, the challenge is to stay with a project all the way through and also to distinguish ourselves and be able to work in that new environment. So that dream of starting a small practice and growing has become increasingly more difficult. So that's really the context of where we're coming from. For me personally, how we found our way into this world was really through 3D problem solving. So we've come from this through a 3D modeling environment. So these are all projects that I've worked on various stages of my career, where the challenge was defining them and documenting them. And so we were always looking for different ways of doing things. So that's really led us into that 3D environment that then has morphed into building information modeling for us. So maybe it's a good time to talk about the motivation for this. So we're very aware of all of our clients asking for this. Every request for a tender response at the moment comes through with BIM Level 2 asked for within that. Quite often you can tell that the people asking the question don't know what they're actually asking for, but it's in everything that we're getting. And I would say now, I can go into the details, but the majority of what we do now has a contractual BIM Level 2 deliverable. But for us, really, the realization was that it's the increase in efficiency that was really important to us. So we know as designers we can add a lot of value in our ideas and how we approach a project, but the time it takes us to document those ideas and to communicate them erodes that value. And importantly for us, it erodes our fee. So really, we saw building information modeling and these processes as a way of trying to hold on to some of that fee. So for us, the original attraction, and we were already 3D modeling most of our projects, but what we were doing was we were tending to then flatten them and go into different, we had a very cut up workflow. So we'd model in one package, we'd then cut it up, put it into a more conventional CAD package in order to communicate it to contractors. We'd then do it again at another level of detail. So we had this sort of inefficient workflow. So we started to look for a better way of working back in about 2007, 2008. So what really attracted us was the idea of working in a more collaborative way and a less adversarial way. So we, in the process of starting to look for these, for a solution to our production information problems at the time, we started to realize that there were tools there that would allow us to do that and collaborate with people at the same time and work in a more joined up way. But what was really important to us as a smaller practice trying to grow, and at this stage we were only 4 people, was the idea of embedded quality control and coordination in our output, and consistency of output. So as a smaller practice, people are almost expecting you to fail because you're not going to be structured about how you produce information. In a way, this gave us that consistency and a reliability of our output that allowed people to start to feel more confident about us, which allowed us to sort of grow the business in effect. And it was also at this stage that we realized that we had it easy when it came to this. So when we started to talk to bigger organizations, we realized that the big challenge here is change management and changing your structures and how you approach these, how you roll a new process out throughout a business. For us, it was really easy. We could make the decision based on intuition. we thought this was something that was going to happen and it was coming towards us, so we could make a very quick, easy, agile decision to change our way of working and run it right the way through the business. So we had a real advantage. So looking back at the timeline, and now looking back, we can see that it really breaks up into 3 distinct phases for us. So initially, back in 2008, and it did coincide with some quite big changes in the economy as well, we started to use these processes, but we were very much in a lonely BIM environment. So we were getting value ourselves, which was helping us survive in a really difficult trading environment. But that was all. It was all about us, really. We then went into what was probably quite a long period of time where we started to find that other people that were as equally enthusiastic about these ways of working were starting to cluster together. And we went into a sort of informal, collaborative environment where we were working with other consultants, engineers, and contractors who started to see real value in these processes. But it was still non-contractual, and it was really based on enthusiasm, I would say. And we're now very much in a contractual BIM environment where I would say between 2/3 and 3/4 of all of our projects at the moment have got a contractual BIM deliverable. So it's perhaps self-fulfilling because we're involved in that world, but it's something that's definitely coming. And these 3 stages of evolution are relevant to something that we look at later on as well. So I think this is quite an important point. For us, this is the most important slide, and this is really where the penny started to drop for us. We worked on a whole series of school projects at the end of the BSF. They're all central London sites, so they're all completely unique responses to their site. Most of them are in conservation areas, and some of them have got listed buildings attached to them. And there was a long series of these projects. What we realised was that even though they were completely unique responses, they were actually made out of all the same components. So with the teams that we were working with, we were using the same ceilings, the same floor finishes, the same roofing systems. Nearly all of them were concrete frames. So they were the same windows, the same doors. So you started to realise that we were effectively using a kit of parts. So what we started to do was develop that virtual kit of parts and start to embed useful information in that kit of parts and start to manage that content. And that meant that from project to project, we could start to quality control that information, and the bad products could drop out and the good products could be promoted. And that really allowed us to become much more efficient in the way that we were producing our projects. A good example in that would be that the doors on these projects are non-standard sizes because they came from a specific manufacturer. And that was built into our process. We also then realised that we can apply this process to all sorts of other projects as well. So these are projects that we've done for a commercial developer client. I think there's actually 19 of them all together in the end. And again, it's a kit of parts developed for them that is actually much lighter in information. So the school projects were quite information heavy. These are quite light. It's a lot to do with efficiency of construction. So again, this is the thing, the point that John was making early on about understanding what the client actually requires, what the EIR is for the project. Certainly in our informal BIM phase, we did projects where there was no roadmap. And it does lead to problems because ultimately, if you signed a contract to deliver BIM Level 2 and you haven't agreed an EIR, technically, they could ask you for everything, and that's not possible. So in a way, the EIR allows you to contain what it is that you're going to produce. So we don't think size is an issue either, and we use these processes on all of our projects, from the very smallest project to the largest, and we have done since about 2009. So we did think we'd have a hybrid approach, but in reality, the efficiency is so clear to us that we've just rolled it right the way through the practice. We've got, within the practice, there is only one person now, we're a team of 20, there's only one person that can, that has actually worked in a different way. So for the majority of people within the team, this is business as usual, and that you can really see that that is how it's going to be throughout the industry. So the other thing that we think is really important is the ability to be able to coordinate complicated, tricky projects. So it isn't, an awful lot of this is about information and data, but we shouldn't forget the importance of modelling. Quite often people will say it's not about the model, it's about the data. And I think that's underestimating just how difficult it is to coordinate a number of different consultants into a complicated model. So that coordination and modelling element is something that the industry really does need to skill up with. And this is, oh, it is going to work. All right. So this is a model for the refit of the Lord's Media Centre, where we've recently put a new interior in it and hung a new camera gantry off the bottom of it. But the ability to be able to, is it on the next slide as well? No. Bear with me. So the ability to be able to coordinate all of the different inputs into the project, the M&E, the architecture, and the structure, and we actually captured the existing structure with laser scanning on this project, allowed us to three-dimensionally coordinate the integration of those elements and effectively push the inside shell of the building further out when it was refitted. And we were able to increase the usable floor area inside the building by 15% as a consequence. Now, I was actually the project architect of the building originally, so effectively either we did a really bad job or the technology that we've got available to us now has allowed us to push things much, much further. So obviously the outside of the building hasn't changed at all, but we've managed to increase the interior area by 15%. This is, I don't think refurbishment projects should be excluded from this at all, and this is one corner of a project that we've recently completed. It's actually a refurbishment of a Barnes project in Cambridge. This is about a fifth of it. And the starting point for this project was to laser scan each of the individual barns and then register them together into a 3D scan of the whole site. And that was done digitally too. So as well as having the laser scan, what we would then do is go out into the field with effectively a total station that talked to a wand. We could then effectively put points within the building that would talk back to our digital model, so we could then position our laser scans in the right location in our virtual world, which then allowed us to position elements within the structure and push those back out onto site using the same process in reverse. So there was no setting out engineer on this project. Effectively, the site team were using the common data environment and the information within that to set things out. So that our starting point was to laser scan, then to build a model of the existing structure, and then effectively a model of the work that we were going to do. So it's all contained within the same place, it's within the same model, but effectively you can use time to say this is what we're going to take out and this is what we're going to put in, and it's all in the same virtual space. Because every element within a building information model has a unique identifier, a bit like how the internet works, what it allowed us to do was tag every piece of timber within the structure. It was sort of almost automatically tagged, but that allowed us then to record what happened to that piece of timber. So these barns are listed, and the historic building officer was very interested in the work that was going to be done to the timber frame. The carpenters on site with iPads would effectively photograph the piece of timber before they did a piece of work, record what they did and photograph it afterwards, and that was tagged automatically into the common data environment. So we have a complete record of all of the work that happened to that piece of structure. And that reassured the conservation officer. Let's just flip forward. So the other things that we're beginning to see is we're beginning to see real opportunities to use these tools in different ways at the beginning of the process as well. And this is building information modeling in a very light way, but in an enormously useful way. So what we're able to do is capture an existing site using photogrammetry very quickly and very cheaply. And the context model here we're able to gain from get from an agency for a few £100. It's accurate to 40 centimetres, which is more accurate than OS information. And then we're effectively able to mass up a proposal within that site using very basic geometric blocks that represent different unit types, different house types or different room types, that sort of thing. And what we've done with our different clients, we're doing this with a number of people, is ask them what questions do they need answering in order to populate their development appraisal. So is that envelope area, floor area, that sort of thing. And it can be any amount of information from a small amount to a large amount. So if this was a hotel, it could go all the way down to what the furniture and the teaspoons are. Or if it's a housing developer, they might just want to know floor areas, unit types, that sort of thing. Because those geometric blocks are linked straight to spreadsheet information, we can make real-time changes to the model, and that repopulates the information in the development appraisal. So it allows us to do incredibly rapid appraisals for a site. So we have a meeting with the planners, and they say, you know, take a floor off the top. We can see what the implication of that is. So instead of developing a single proposal, we could perhaps develop 6 very quickly and start to do a SWOT analysis on those. And we're also beginning to see our clients realizing the value of the asset at completion. Because we tend to stay with our projects right the way through to completion, we'll maintain the model throughout construction. And that data set at the end with the 3D model has got a very real commercial value. And it was a real eye-opener to realize that quite often when we were finishing a project, what was happening was people were coming in and surveying it and producing effectively mirroring the information that we've used during construction. What we're able to do now is offer that information across. We're also seeing clients now coming to us and asking us to capture existing assets in the same way. So we're going in, laser scanning them, producing digital models of them, and attaching the information that they want to those models in order to manage those assets going forwards. So there's a whole new workflow opening up for designers. So how have we done this within the practice? Effectively, what we've done is try to reimagine the practice. So we've restructured the office both physically and virtually around this idea of a BIM workflow. So we've arranged ourselves around a single desk, and it might sound a bit naff, but really it's trying to get at the idea of representing the collaboration that is so important to this. We've tried to set it up very much as a mission room environment. So there's a 30-meter long whiteboard along one side of the office, and the idea there is to get what's in the computer out of the computer and onto the wall, because effectively, apart from putting stuff on the wall, we're paperless. Everything is within our system and is coded, as John pointed out before, which means that quite often some of your documents have got a lot of X's on them. The other thing about being around a single desk is to encourage that, encourage peer-to-peer learning and get that sort of, quite often architects' offices have got a very hushed environment. We're trying really to get people to talk to each other, share what's on screen, and collaborate. So I was saying there are interactive whiteboards, there's lots of peer-to-peer learning. And a really important part is really understanding the tools, the technology, and putting the training in place. One of the things that we realized through going through this process is that different generations think and work in different ways. So our colleague Eynon here had found a way of marking up drawings directly in the common data environment without even taking PDFs off them onto his machine. He was making the changes within 4 projects, making the comments within 4 projects. So that's it had a few potential contractual issues, but what it did do was really speed up the workflow for him. So it saved an awful lot of downloading and uploading time. The realization is that effectively the younger generation, if they hit a problem, instead of keep banging their head against the problem like our generation might have, what they'll quite often do is go onto their network, their social network, and look for a workaround. So they'll go round a problem rather than trying to just work their way through it. And that's effectively innovation. So that's how things are going to move forwards. But the challenge for a business is then to put a wrapper around that to make sure that they stay contractual and within the commercial environment that we're working in. And that was really the next part of our challenge. So what we then did was we took all of our checklists, our ISO 9001, our ISO 14001, all of our systems, and took them apart. And then we put them all back together in a single best practice management system that had the BIM task group suite of documents at the heart. So in effect, even the most junior person in the practice will be acting in a compliant way for BIM Level 2 without necessarily having to understand exactly what it is that they're doing. So all of our document naming, our libraries of information are all compliant. They have the kit of parts. They can work with that and stay on-piste effectively. So what we're doing is putting a wrapper around them, allowing them to innovate and be thoughtful, but effectively trying to make sure that the output is managed and structured and coordinated. And in the early days, that included us putting together almost a matrix, our own BIM plan of work, which has now been superseded by the NBS toolkit. We would use that as by default because that idea of knowing who's going to do what, when, and to what level of detail has become hugely valuable. And what we found with this is that single best practice management system, which is actually quite a thin document with deep dives in it. It's a digital document. The deep dives will take you to the more detailed documents if you need to go into them, but effectively it's a completely readable, completely accessible thing that is used on a day-to-day basis in the office. So it's not something that's on the shelf. It's something that's on people's desktops. And so we found that that's been really welcomed by our accreditors. And the idea that it's all in one place has really been a very positive result. The other thing that I think is really important to us is the idea of someone from the outside coming in and checking that what we're doing, what we say we are doing. And this is actually the outputs from a BIM maturity audit that was carried out on us quite a long time ago. We've just had another one done by the BRE. And this was hugely valuable. So effectively, over a 2-day period, someone came in, audited our models, audited our processes, and gave us a score for what we were doing well, what we were doing badly, and we then put an action plan in place to address that. And that fed into our training plan effectively our people management system. So for us, we believe it's cost us about £12,000 a seat to implement this as a design practice. It's going to be different for different organisations. But when we look at that, we break that down as to what it is, that nearly 50% of that is training. And why wouldn't you do training anyway? So that's an important part of developing a good team and retaining a good team. The software has a very real price. There's no denying that there's an investment to be made in the software, but the hardware is not a big cost. It isn't a barrier at all. But if we then look at our extra overcost for implementing building information modelling on top of our technical staff costs and our fee income, and it's the BIM costs effectively the pink line, you can see it starts to be quite a small sliver of expenditure during the project. And this is the key diagram for us. So this goes back to that very early diagram. So in the lonely BIM phase, we saw our costs and our fee income stay practically parallel. So we were maybe gaining a little bit of a little bit of sort of advantage from using these processes, but not a lot. During that informal collaborative BIM process, we saw a real increase in our efficiency, and this is when we started to collaborate with other consultants and with main contractors. And then that plateaued, and we really did think that was where it was going to land. What we're actually seeing now that we're in a contractual BIM environment, is our efficiencies lifted again. And this is counterintuitive in that we're now involved in an awful lot more bureaucracy than we would have been previously, and that there are new roles and responsibilities within the team. But I'm pretty sure that this is a consequence of having that very clear roadmap based around the contract of who's going to do what, when, and to what level of detail. And that's where we've got I think we're getting the new efficiencies from. So am I running short? Yeah. Maybe if I just rattle very quickly through a very quick case study. This is actually the last school in that series of schools. It was an £18 million extension to a school in the east of London. And really the main output of this, I'll skip to the headline, which was the programme was an 18-month programme from a blank sheet of paper to handing over the project. And the first milestone was getting to a planning application within 7 weeks. So we don't think that would have been possible if we weren't effectively working in a collaborative environment using a pre-arranged kit of parts with a group of people who knew what they were going to be doing with that kit of parts. That process included an awful lot of stakeholder engagement, as all school projects do, and really the ability to be able to show the stakeholders what they were going to get effectively allowed us to accelerate that early stage engagement part. Obviously, all of the coordination from the consultants was done within the model, including getting the environmental performance out for BREEAM at the early stages. So we were able to sort of say, what else can we put in the model that we can extract to speed up the process, and BREEAM assessment was one of them. But perhaps if we look at the structural element of the building, that's perhaps the most interesting. So the part of this FAST program was to build this building out of cross-laminated timber, and effectively the process that we went through with that was possibly the best illustration of BIM within the project. So the engineers, Ramble, gave us a set of rules at the beginning when we were designing the building. So we designed the building with those rules in mind, and we had our indicative structure, a cross-laminated structure within our model at that early stage. Once the main form of the building was solidifying, we were then able to take our structure out and put Ramble's structure in, their model in, and we then carried out a coordination exercise with the M&E, the architecture and the structure. Then, further down the line, we then took Ramble's structure out and put the cross-laminated timbers supplier structure in. So the very final coordination was all done with the information that was then going to be used to actually CNC cut the output. So right up until the minute that we pressed the button on the CNC cutting, we were able to make changes to the coordination, which was really, really valuable. And because this is a BIM process, every component has a unique identifier and can be tracked right the way through the process. It can be barcoded. We know where it is, and we know when it's going to arrive on site. So this is a load sheet for a lorry that's coming from the factory. So we know which bits of the building are coming on which days, which can avoid it being double-handled. So again, it's just another output of this idea of this single source of truth and everything existing within that common data environment. And then just a gratuitous photograph of it being built and it being completed. And I think the main thing that we were able to achieve here really was that we were able to give the school a bespoke solution in the time frame that was really only suggesting a off-the-shelf solution at a budget that was close to the off-the-shelf solution as well. So I have got more, but I'll stop at that point. Thank you.
So a huge thank you to David there. I think if you needed a clear business case for why to do this, that was it. That feed diagram, the work he's done with his organisation is phenomenal. Big thank you to both John and David for their time and input this morning. It's been really, really useful. Just before we get into the cross-examination, which Lewis is going to lead, I said I'd share our contact details with you. These are them. You're welcome to take a picture of this slide. We are going to send this the slide deck out to you guys. With taking pictures, could you just not post those pictures on social media, because our inboxes are going to explode as it is. So without our email addresses going viral, that would be very, very handy. So yeah, myself on Twitter at Fred Mills or Fred_Mills, fred.mills@b1m.com. John is at 56johns. I still don't know what that means, but he may explain afterwards. John Eynon at me.com, and then David Miller of David Miller Architects. You can check him out on Twitter at DMA Architects. He's david.miller at david-miller.co.uk. I'm going to embarrass David as well, because his website won Best Architectural Website in the world. Yeah, in England, yes, not Wales. There's a better one in Wales. So do go and check out the DMA website. That's fantastic. Also, shameless plug for myself. We have got short YouTube documentaries on building a practice with BIM, which goes inside David Miller's practice and explains some of the stuff he was doing there as well. That's about a 8-minute YouTube documentary. We've also got a 10-minute documentary on Lord's Media Centre, when cricket met BIM. So that is behind the scenes at Lord's, looking at the work David did. Shameless plug from me, but it's also linking to David Miller and some of the stuff he's done. So, without further ado, I'm going to ask Lewis to lead the cross-examination.
Well, best if you all come up and sit at the table, if you might. I might want to remove the decorations on the end here, because the video will look a bit odd otherwise. I'm just going to put them down here. Okay, so I think, yes, Harriet's got a microphone, and if you could wait, I'm sure you've got some questions, so when I say please ask the question, just wait for the microphone. That way we can capture the question, and anybody watching on video knows what was asked. So, any questions there? There's one right here. Let's kick off. It should work.
Hang on, it does work. Yeah. I think this is probably one for David, but anyone else is free to answer. During the early stages, when you were kind of in that collaborative area, did you often get pushback from sort of particularly subcontractors in the supply chain when you were trying to get them into this process? Because that's something I've found a lot of.
I think it's the subcontractors and the suppliers that have got the most work to do to catch up, which is quite understandable. So in that early stage, it was it was consultants and main contractors that were engaging with this. We would still struggle to get a lot of subcontractors and suppliers to engage with this. Quite often we're effectively doing it not for them but for ourselves, but modelling generically and attaching the information that we require to those models. To a certain extent, and I'm maybe being a bit controversial here, but suppliers, we don't necessarily want suppliers to give us very over-detailed models because they're going to clutter up our models and be unreliable. What we want to use is generic content that is geometrically accurate. We need to know how big the window is and what it looks like, not every seal within it. What's really valuable is the information that's attached to that window, and to a certain extent we can curate that if we need to, and hold that either within our discipline model or quite often now separately in a separate database. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that does.
The temptation these days, as John was sort of saying earlier, and David as well, in this data-rich world, we've got all this exciting data now, and we can find out all these things and play all these tunes and share all this information. And there's a temptation to say, look what we can do, we can give you all of this data. But actually it's about drilling down into what data do you actually need at that specific moment in time, which is why the EORs are so important. What information do I need to inform decision making on my project at certain points in the road? So it's, as David was saying, it's about being prescriptive around what data you need and when, rather than getting all of the data and none of the data, because we kind of get ranges between that, I'd say.
Okay.
I think my question's for David as well. Thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. Are you able to speak a little about how the school used the BIM information that you'd collected while you were designing and constructing for their ongoing maintenance?
Yes, that particular project was actually finished in 2014, so 3 years ago and 2 years before the mandate. So it was almost done as a BIM Level 2 trial, where everything was there, but there was no actual request for it. So it's available to the school if they want it, but they didn't. Obviously now, if it was a government-funded school, it would be a contractual requirement, and even then we're only just beginning to see that coming through. I suspect the new framework probably demands it much more explicitly than it has done. Would you? Do you have an insight into that?
No.
Question? Okay, all right, wandering out, there's one in front there. Yeah.
Okay, so this is very much a BIM for beginners question. There's a lot of talk about BIM process. I don't understand or know what a BIM process actually is. Perhaps you'd like to try and explain that for us?
Ooh.
Who wants to go?
Go on. Well, I would say that it's probably caught by the MBS toolkit and what's captured within that, and that is really taking every RIBA stage and saying what it is that what each contributor to the project is going to produce at each of those stages, to what level and to what level of detail. So it's the idea of effectively road mapping the whole project out at the beginning, as opposed to just what we used to do, which was sort of muddle our way through with lots of different interpretations of what a stage 3 report is and what a stage 4 report is. What the toolkit is allowing us to do is saying, for this project, at stage 3, each of these different people are going to produce these things to this level of detail. So it's effectively a design responsibility matrix and a level of detail matrix, all captured in one place.
I think where that's pictorially presented is in the PAS 1192 document. I know this morning there was a lot of documents on that screen, but PAS 1192 Part 2 is the one. And at the front of that there is a single diagram that shows you the project process that talks about EIR, BIM execution plan up front, and then going through the what were the RBA stages of work and that information model, graphical and non-graphical, building in richness to a point of handover to becoming an asset information model. Shameless plug from me again. We've got a 5-minute explanatory video that builds up that process map on YouTube that takes it through it. Badge of, I don't know what you said, review. My dad understood it. So that's a good benchmark for hopefully making it as accessible. You probably guessed from earlier, I'm quite passionate about making BIM as accessible and as simple as possible for people. So go and watch my video. It's shameless, isn't it?
I think just to add to what David said is there's a number of processes going on. So yes, there is effectively what David's articulated is the design management process. So all the good things you do there, responsibilities, matrices, deliverable schedules, the master information delivery plan, all that sort of stuff. You know, that's all articulated in the standard. There's also the process of responding to the EIR or producing the employer's information requirement if you need to, producing the BIM execution plan and everything that needs to go into there to be an effective answer to the EIR in terms of capability assessment, the management process, and all the tools that have to go in there. And then you've got all that, and you've got your information management process. So if you take any piece of information on the journey through the process, how it's named, how it changes status, when it's shared, when it's made public, when it's superseded, all that stuff, that has to be articulated as well, and that's another process. But actually, I think, as I said, you know, when I was talking, it comes around, it all comes down to understanding how you use information. The rest of it is really then how we bolt this together and make it all talk and sing together, you know. But at the end of the day, it's that information flow and understanding how that information works and journeys through the process all the way through.
Can I ask another question? When people talk about BIM, quite often people just say it's got to be Revit. Can I make any commentary on that? Those of us that don't have any BIM software at the moment.
It quite simply doesn't. So, the industry is working really hard at finding ways that the right tools can talk to each other. So it can't just be Revit. That just happens to be very well marketed.
Yeah, and it's not BIM isn't a software tool. BIM is the process, and within that there are a number of digital software tools that will help you do that. Revit is a graphical authoring tool that's very well engineered for building information modelling working. There are other tools out there. Revit is very good. It's the world-leading software, but there's ArchiCAD, there's Vectorworks, there's all sorts of other software as well. And you kind of need to be led, in terms of looking at what software to use if you're in a design practice, it's being led on, I suppose, what your staff are used to and comfortable with and what you're trying to achieve, the nature of your work and workload. I think it's worth having a look around. I know this is being filmed, but I think Autodesk kind of perpetuate the marketing myth that Revit and BIM are one and the same thing because it helps them. Hello, Autodesk, if you're watching.
I think again, just to add to that, BIM is actually, we talk about people, process and technology. So yes, the technology platform is important, but actually you need your processes and standards and methods and procedures in place in order to be able to use that technology effectively. And actually the hardest ask is around people, getting people trained properly with the right sort of collaborative culture to work together to use these tools effectively. You do find that different platforms can be used in different sectors. So the rail sector, for instance, I think uses Bentley a lot. Yeah. So it's horses for courses. Also, if you're thinking about which platform to launch on, if it was me, I'd be talking to my clients about what they need. I'd be talking to the people that I work with on a regular basis, because if everybody else is working in ArchiCAD, that you mostly work with, why work in Revit? Because you've immediately created another problem to fix before you've even started. So I think there's a and we don't do this, but I think there's a lot of sense in actually talking to your peers, talking to your customers, particularly if you've got a customer that you really get on with. Just say, we're thinking about getting into BIM. What do you think we should do? You know, what would you like out of it? How could we serve you better? You know, what would you give us more money for? You know, if you know, all those sorts of conversations. And the people you work with in wider teams, contractors, suppliers. Again, if everybody's standardised on a platform, it makes sense to jump in with both feet, doesn't it? Because you've solved one problem, you know, and it will make life a bit easier for you. I think there's a lot for actually. We're very bad at sharing experience as an industry, but one thing I've found over the last 6 years now on this journey is BIM is one of the things that is making us talk. Because when we strip it all away and peel the onion, we've all got the same problems, you know, and we can help each other. And that's what we need to do.
Another question? Can we come over here? Could you wait for the microphone, because then we have to get it on the video.
If you're a manufacturer, at what point in the chain do you need to maybe consider BIM? I don't know if you're a hinge manufacturer, for example, you probably don't need it, but that goes into a system, into a door system, into a building. So, you know, if you're a manufacturer of a component that goes into a larger system that forms part of the fabric of the building, at what stage do you think they should be considering BIM? Or I mean, Dave, you talked about teaspoons, for example, which is probably,
in a way, the manufacturer's information sort of sits separately anyway. So if explain the process on, say, well, probably on any project, but a school project would be a really good example. We, pre-construction, a component like a door would have its performance criteria identified within the model, but it wouldn't be the manufacturer information, because we've got to go through a procurement process, and you'd be stopped from doing that, effectively. So what we would tend to do is model with generic components at the beginning. We would then add in the performance criteria we need for that stage, and then once we were into construction, we would swap out that component for the actual manufacturer's component, or leave the generic geometric component there and change the information that's attached to it, which is increasingly what we're doing, rather than the component. So in a way, their information is catalogue information that they would have sitting there anyway. It's, yes, yeah, that's a really good case in point. So in a way, you can see how our process of specifying is changing. So our old way of specifying was effectively to draw what we wanted to see and then write a description of what it is we'd like it to be made out of. But it was descriptive, it wasn't prescriptive. And what this is allowing us to do is to be much more prescriptive, because we're now actually being much more definitive in the geometric model, and we can be much more prescriptive with the information. So our specifications are now largely spreadsheets of components. I mean, you can see us moving towards a component schedules as opposed to a narrative about what we want the building to be like, which again is taking away that grey area that's there. So for a manufacturer, it's about taking all that information that they've already got and just formatting it into a structured way that can be easily used in this process.
I think in the kind of digital world we're in, if you can, as David just said, make your data freely available to as many people as possible, whether it's in maybe graphical form, depends on the component, but graphical form with that digital specification, so that people take it up and use it early in the design and planning process, you've got more chance of being specified and involved in that project going forward, because you've given useful information out to people. That's what's happening, isn't it?
Yeah.
As you said, social media.
Probably need to be aware as well, there's a thing called Project Lexicon, and there's also things called Product Data Templates, PDTs for short, which is a project to standardise the information about all products across industry. So it's a standard, it's like a mini set of COBE in a way. It's a standard format for manufacturers' information, which has been agreed across people like the Construction Products Association and other people. That's just about ready to come off the blocks, and there is a commercial company who shall remain nameless, who got a lot of people to pay them to produce models of their products, which I think, to be honest, has limited value. I mean, who needs a fully rendered model of a water pump? What would you do with it? You know, as an architect coordinated design, I just need to know how big is it, how do I fix the thing, where does it connect? You know, again, same for a door. The only reason you want a fully rendered door is to put it in a CGI or something. You don't need that in a stage 4 construction model, but you do need the data, and that's why the data connected to that door, however it's modelled, is the important thing. We'll deal with the spatial coordination anyway, I would hope, but it's the data about that door, its fire resistance, acoustics, all that sort of stuff, would be in a PDT or a mini COBE spreadsheet, that kind of thing. So that's really where the work needs to go.
We had a just anecdotally, recently had quite an entertaining situation, because obviously if you're asking people to complete a COBE spreadsheet for their product, it's like you're going to feel slightly seasick just looking at it. But there are tools available where you can fill in the forms in a much more plain language way, and then that populates the COBE spreadsheet. And what we did on a medical project recently, a small one, was get all of the suppliers together in a hotel kind of conference room, gave them the form, and they weren't allowed to leave until they filled it out. And that worked, you know. So we then had the information that we then needed to attach to the geometric model to complete the COBE deliverable, because that was extracted from that form process. And it really wasn't very painful. It's just when someone sort of says, "Oh, you need to put all your products into COBE," I can quite understand why people feel slightly sort of nervous about it.
Any other questions? You are, absolutely.
Thanks. This is another one for David, unfortunately. You touched briefly in your presentation on when you originally thought you'd only use the sort of BIM process for larger projects, but actually ended up using it for everything. Can you talk a little more about how you came to that decision with small projects?
It wasn't necessarily size, it was type. So when the software was being sold to us, It was the idea that you might model to a certain level of detail, but you'd still produce your detailed details as drawings. And that proved not to be the case really quickly. You could model to quite a high level of detail once your team's skilled enough, and then you can effectively add a bit of drawing if you need to within the same place. So you don't have this dysfunction. It might have been a way of selling us more software. The other one was that we thought that we would use it on new build projects but not on refurbishment projects, and we do quite a lot of refurbishment projects, but that's just not the case. You can model a refurbishment project just as easily as you can model a new one. So it was didn't take us long to realise that there was no value in keeping the 2D stuff really. I think it's all paid for now, so it's all still there. Does that?
Yeah, it does. But you mentioned about the refurb stuff and this sort of scanning that's involved in that.
Yeah.
Is that something that you find clients are all willing to pay for? Or?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
That's a pretty categorical answer, thank you.
Yeah. And increasingly as well. So if you think about clients beginning to realise that it's valuable to have a record of what they've got that is useful, and they're going to get it for their new projects. If there's an easy, affordable way of getting it for your existing estate, why wouldn't you start to capture it? And I think sophisticated clients are beginning to do that.
Yes, some universities are doing that. They've scanned their entire estates and created a BIM environment. Some developers have made that commitment as well. So people like Great Portland Estates, because they lease out and that sort of stuff. So it's in their interest to have up-to-date models of their buildings. So all their new buildings are level 2, I think, and they're going back, working through their existing building stock.
Okay, there's one question here. Two questions. I'll take both.
One for the panel generally, but David, what you're saying about tagging the timbers in your listed barn conversion, at any point with all this information that was being provided within the design team, did you ever feel that any discipline was perhaps opening themselves up to more risk as a result of the information produced? But say with the timbers, if anything were to happen, say a risk that might not have initially been there?
No, because all we're doing is, by having all of this information within the common data environment and everything tracked, and on that particular project, everything was done in the common data environment. All the RFIs, everything is recorded in the meeting minutes, everything. It's all searchable. So as long as we're doing what it is that we're supposed to be doing from a professional point of view, what you're actually doing is reducing the risk of there being misunderstandings. You know, you can search for anything in the same way as you can on the internet, I suppose. So they might be opening themselves up if they haven't done what they're supposed to have done.
I was just going.
But we're trying to change.
There is on the. I'm not quite sure where it is, but it's either on the task group website or it's probably on the BSI website as well. There is a guidance note produced by the CIC on BIM and professional liability insurance and that sort of thing. And I think really there is a key paragraph in that guidance note that says, I think generally the CIC consulted with the major indemnity insurers in the UK, and level 2 was fine generally, apart from the fact that the insurers would be expecting you to work in accordance with the level 2 standards. And if you're not, you need to tell them what you're doing instead. So there is a bit of a stick in terms of making people do what they should be doing. And I'm totally with David here. I think this, you could look at BIM as actually a risk management tool. The more data you've got, It's all trackable. You've got your decision trees there. It's all auditable. Anytime you can go back. You can lock it down X, Y, Z, and in time as well. You know, it's all there. It's just as long as we're doing our job, you know, and you're closing out the unknowns and getting more data to make better decisions with. That's what it's all about.
I completely agree with everything that John Davis said. I suppose the flip side to that, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier about BIM being used as this kind of Trojan horse for change in the industry, is it brings in a lot more transparency, and suddenly everyone can see everything that everyone's been doing for years, and the shortcuts and the corners that we used to cut are now very visible and open. So we've kind of ripped the plaster off, and there's a degree of pain to go through for us all to start working in that more professional, higher integrity way, especially when you've got an existing organisation full of people that have done this for decades that are used to working that way. So yeah, I completely agree with what the guys just said, but it's true that the transparency is quite painful for some people.
Yeah,
great
great question. Great question, bit of a sore point. I think my understanding is around about £8 million was spent by government on producing level 2 framework. About 15 million has been committed initially to the Digital Build Britain group. How much of that money actually went to industry? None of it, basically. All the work that we do through the BIM regions, the BIM 4 communities, the UK BIM Alliance is pro bono. We're not paid a penny. Anybody that thinks we're paid anything to do it, you're barking up the wrong tree, and it's actually costing us money. In my case, it's costing me my own money to do this. I'm a self-employed consultant. I totally agree. I think there are research grants and stuff available. There's probably stuff available through Innovate UK, but getting an SME to go through that process to get that money is an uphill struggle. I would certainly say, and I'm becoming more vocal about this, I think there's a strong argument for government or business innovation and skills, or whatever they are these days, to provide more support to industry, both in terms of rolling out training, upskilling, all these kinds of things, because the benefits will be there, but it's the learning curve, and I think to invest, particularly if you're a high-end user of this stuff, so you need to invest in hardware, software, and all the kit and training that goes with it. It's a big cost. You know, so expecting an SME to suddenly stump up that kind of money, just like that, and then you've got, what, a 12, 18-month learning curve to work through a few projects, get the processes in place, do all that sort of stuff. It's a big investment. It's a big investment. And unfortunately, and this is where I sometimes talk about the sort of Darwinian evolutionary thing we're going through, and this is where some people will fall by the wayside, or they'll leave the industry and go do something else, like become an accountant, I don't know, whatever. Because it's a disincentive to change and to transform and to innovate. And the culture of our industry doesn't help either, because it's increasingly competitive, it's low margins, it's high risk, it's low investment, and we're all chasing each other to the bottom in order to win the next job. Something has to change, doesn't it?
I'm going to agree and disagree.
Fine, go for it.
I agree with the last bit about the cultural thing and the challenges within the industry. But I don't think the costs are a big issue. I think there is a return on investment that we can certainly see. And for many people within our industry, certainly consultants, the financial barriers to entry are very low anyway. You need a brass plaque and a computer, don't you, to be an architect? The idea of spending just a little bit more on your tools and your training isn't such a big deal if you can start to leverage real advantages from it. I mean, I'd love there to be tax relief or something for
Has it had an effect on your margins, if I may be so nosy? I mean, clearly you've made a big investment, you're sort of leading in this area. Can you see that you've improved the performance of the business?
Yes, because we're a smaller business, I think it's quite easy for us to see the implications of changes. If you're a bigger business, it might be difficult to track them. And we certainly, I think, when we first started, it allowed us to survive in 2008, 2009 by making us efficient enough to be able to do that. Yes, I definitely can see it on our margins. And I think if we also look at the number of people we put on a project compared with some of our contemporaries, which must have an implication on our costs, we can do more with less people. That's a consequence of the tools.
But a lot of that depends not on whether practices or processes that you set out. For example, working with elements or residential projects.
Yes. Well, maybe that leads into something else as well, which is that perhaps these processes steer you towards repeat business, which isn't actually a bad place to go anyway for some people. So one of the other things that we're seeing happening is teams staying together from project to project and getting efficiencies as a consequence of that, because they've got the processes that mesh together.
I'm going to just quickly disagree. Because
are you disagreeing with him or disagreeing with me?
Both to some extent, and also the kind of I like the ingenuity of the policy, and obviously government support training is always welcome and supported, but telling someone to do something is never as effective as convincing them they should do it for their own benefit. And I'll give you two examples that aren't related to our industry. I have a 2.5-year-old boy at home. If I tell him to put his shoes on, I'm up against it. If I say put your shoes on because then we can go to the swings, he gets it, he does it, he's there, he's part of it. Apple, if the US government or the UN or whoever it may be had mandated that every human being on earth should have an Apple iPhone, Apple wouldn't have sold as many as they currently have. What they did was make something ridiculously useful that benefits all of us and changes our lives and compels us with why we should get it rather than us being told to get it. So I think what we've done in the UK is we've led the world in standards and documentation and thought process and mandate and saying, come on, let's get on and do this. I think what we failed to do is take that good stuff and sell that vision to the masses. We've written a manifesto, but we haven't won the voters. And I think that's where it comes down to vision, ROI, examples like David's, and doing it that way, because telling people to do stuff, whether it's through tax encouragement, all that great stuff, is just never as effective as saying, here's why, here's the value proposition. My view.
At that point, I think we need to bring proceedings to an appropriate point, because you have been doing a bit of telling, but you've also been doing a bit of engagement, I hope, and now you will hopefully all be evangelists for it. So thank you for coming along to our event, and I want a big thank you to the speakers. And just before we give them the round of applause, if there's things you want to catch up on here, you get presentations, the video of everything that's been said should be going up sometime next week, so you can go back in there and recapture things. So thank you all again. And do if you're thinking, well, what I really want now is some other event that follows on from this or whatever, just email us at events@buildingcentre.co.uk and tell us what you want. So thank you, and thank you very much to the speakers.